As the cruel edge started to manifest itself from swirling dark mist, and the helmet of the undying chain was being summoned into existence, Sonny had a moment to evaluate their chances. The result wasn't too good. He didn't know how powerful exactly Mordret was, but the chances that he was considerably stronger than their enemies seemed to be slim enough to be considered non-existent. Otherwise, the banished prince would not have had to rely on his cunning so much. From how they were positioned and the little details of everyone's gazes, Sonny knew that Welthe was aiming for Mordret and vice versa. That meant that he was going to have to face Pierce, while Saint and the Serpent would be tasked with holding back the echoes. He wasn't too worried for Saint, who was an ascended and excelled in defense and durability. The Serpent, however, would have to be really careful. Sonny was most worried about himself, though. He was not going to underestimate Pierce. The man was not only a master, but also an elite, a knight of the great clan Valor. He was as formidable as he was deadly. His aspect made Pierce resistant to all sorts of attacks as well. With this in mind, Sonny commanded 2 shadows to wrap themselves around his body and reluctantly sent one to Saint. Ascended or not, fighting against 8 echoes was going to test the limits of her ability. That was all the time he had to prepare. Long before the cruel edge finished weaving itself from mist, the blood-soaked hall of the somber cathedral exploded with violence and motion. Welthe's eyes suddenly shone with a hypnotic scarlet light, and Mordret staggered as he was dashing forward. A pained groan escaped from his lips, and his movement slowed down considerably. In the next moment, the body of the female sentinel shimmered and disappeared. Moving with terrifying speed, Welthe lunged forward, then spun her slender saber colliding against something mid-air. The clashing of blades echoed amid the black stones, and 2 fissures appeared on the layer of blood covering the floor, as though someone was sliding back, pushed away by the force of the impact. At the same time, the 8 echoes attacked. The creatures moved with the frightening precision of soulless machines, coordinating their assault with enough cohesion to make them a fearsome threat. Although their intelligence couldn't compare to actual humans, morbid effigies retained enough of the skill of their originals to fight almost as human warriors would. Each of them possessed an aspect, too. Saint collided with their formation like a demon born out of darkness, her kite shield receiving a rain of blows as the midnight shard shot forward. The soul Serpent submerged into the shadows and flowed through them, appearing behind the 6 advancing echoes to lunge at the 2 whose aspect abilities allowed them to perform ranged attacks. And lastly, there was Sonny. Pierce descended upon him like a siege ram, bringing down his longsword with enough force to make the whole hall tremble. Even augmented by 2 shadows, Sonny was still unable to compete with the master in terms of physical ability, but the gap between them wasn't large enough for him to be instantly overwhelmed. Sidestepping, he received the edge of the enemy's sword on the vambrace of the undying chain, angling it in a way that allowed for most of the force to be deflected instead of absorbed. And threw his other hand forward, the ghostly blade of the moonlight shard glinting dimly as it appeared out of nowhere, aimed at Pierce's throat. The master simply lowered his head, allowing the tip of the stiletto to slide off the cheek guard of his helmet, and pushed the hilt of his sword forward, trying to deliver a crushing blow to Sonny's chest. Sonny jumped back, not at all disappointed by the failure of his treacherous blow. It had not been meant to do any damage anyway. It just had to buy the cruel edge to finally manifest itself into a material form. And now it had. Sonny thrust the somber spear forward, forcing the enemy to dodge out of the way and give him a moment to breathe. Through the insight of Shadow Dance, Sonny could see and understand some of the Ascended Knight's battle techniques. Pierce possessed explosive strength and enough agility to channel it into almost inescapable attacks. His understanding of combat was tremendously deep. Sharpened by years upon years of relentless training and countless battles, a warrior of such skill was not going to be led into an easy trap. His control of soul essence was also on a completely different level. From what Sonny could perceive, the master was using it with terrifying efficiency, achieving results that he himself couldn't even dream of, especially without the help of Soul Serpent. That was the core difference between them and his main disadvantage. The only advantage he had, really, was the undying chain. The transcendent armor was durable enough to withstand a few blows from Pierce, and his high divine affinity only made it stronger. He just had to make sure that he doesn't receive the brutal blows directly. His body beneath the bleak steel was not as resilient. Neither he nor Pierce possessed aspect abilities capable of dealing direct damage, so this fight was going to be decided by skill, cunning, and the hidden aces they were saving for the right moment. Problem was, Sonny didn't really have any aces left, at least none that would work on the fearsome master. He was already going all out. Sonny had a split second to check on how the others were doing before resuming the deadly dance of death with Pierce. He quickly glanced to the side and saw the soul serpent entangled with the two echoes, dodging destructive attacks as it slithered around them. Saint was forced into a defensive stance, being barraged by constant strikes as she somehow managed to deflect all of them with the patient avenger and the midnight shard. Mordret and Welthe seemed to be at a temporary stalemate too. Or at least that was how it seemed. The second master was moving too fast, and their battle was too bizarre to really tell. Sonny gritted his teeth and spat a bitter curse, thinking that the bastard was just too strong. He couldn't divide his attention anymore. If he wanted to win against Pierce, he had to focus all of it on him, and make sure that the bastard had no time to pay attention to anyone else as well. Sonny is holding his own against a fearsome master, but the fight is far from over. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next episode. Sonny used everything he had, moving with unimaginable speed, agility, and precision. Both shadow essence and the tenacious blood of Weaver flowed through his body, supplying his muscles with the strength and endurance necessary to perform with such an inhuman level of effort. His mind was aflame, devouring information about his surroundings and the enemy's movements, making lightning-fast decisions, trying to predict countless probable eventualities, and simultaneously studying the sophisticated battle style of the battle-hardened master. And despite all that, he was barely surviving Pierce's unrelenting assault. Every moment, he was just a split second away from death. The Knight of Valor was just too powerful, skilled, and overbearing. His cold eyes were full of calculating ruthlessness and dark iron-killing intent. They were calm and focused, like that of an experienced predator stalking helpless prey. That prey, unfortunately, was Sonny, who breathed a sharp curse of damnation. Nothing he had experienced could have prepared him for this. Sonny had fought many opponents that were stronger and faster than him, but he had never been this outmatched in terms of sheer power, at least not in a fight against a human, who, unlike most nightmare creatures, also possessed a keen mind, devious cunning, and martial skill that were the greatest weapons of his kind. Maybe only Morgan of Valor, but she had held back. And theirs had not really been a battle to the death. Sonny and Pierce clashed on the bloodied stones, their weapons flashing through the air fast enough to leave afterimages behind. The clangor of metal filled the somber hall, mixing with the furious sounds of battle coming from their left. There, two different storms of metal raged violently, one centered around Mordret and Welthe, the other from where his shadows fought the echoes of the fearsome master. Sonny had no time to look that way, but he could hear the constant ringing of blades landing on Saint's shield. There were so many blows that their sounds almost merged into one dreadful, uninterrupted litany of steel. He had not heard the spell yet, so he knew that none of the echoes had been destroyed. The shadows were in one piece as well, even if he didn't know whether or not they were whole, damaged, or dying. He deflected another strike of Pierce's swift longsword, then whipped the butt of the cruel sight forward, hoping to catch the enemy in the face. Helmet or not, such a strike was bound to deliver some damage. Pierce received the blow calmly and didn't even flinch. Instead, he lunged forward and rammed into Sonny with his shoulder, sending him flying back. Sonny cursed the bastard, demanding to know if he was made of stone.
Curse that bastard, is he made of stone or what?
Sonny twisted in the air and landed on his feet, tasting blood in his mouth. That shoulder bash was powerful enough to shatter a stone wall. His tempered bones had not shattered, though. Gritting his teeth, he immediately shifted, dodging a powerful thrust, and brought his spear down on the enemy, muttering that it was fine, that the longer he survived the better he understood the knight's style, and the better he understood it the longer he would survive.
Fine, this is fine. The longer I survive, the better I understand his style. The better I understand his style, the longer I'll survive.
The two of them fought ferociously, neither showing any sign of doubt, hesitation, or weakness. Yes, Sonny was younger and less powerful, but he was skilled and experienced too. He was ruthless and cunning too. He was a killer himself. Pierce had managed to land several debilitating blows, rattling his entire body. The undying chain held, but beneath it, Sonny was bruised and battered. However, he had been able to break through the knight's defense and deliver a few strikes of his own. The results were less than ideal, though. Even when he succeeded in thrusting the tip of the cruel sight through a crack in the enemy's armor, it was like trying to cut through a monster's hide. He only managed to burn the bastard a little and make a few drops of blood roll down. Why was divine flame not as destructive as it should have been? What was wrong with this monster? Pierce pushed him away, briefly glanced at the shallow wound, and grinned darkly, not showing any indication of being bothered by it. Castor remarked that this was all Sonny could do, that it was not nearly enough, calling him a little rat.
Is this all you can do? Not enough, not nearly enough, little rat.
Shut your mouth, you suddenly have time to waste breath.
With that, he attacked again, this time switching the enchantment of the mirror blade from incandescent flame to invisible, insidious soul damage. Pierce snarled and deflected the blow without too much effort. It was almost time, though, when the master decided to speak, without doubt aiming to distract and agitate the opponent. Sonny had a split second to steal a glance at how his shadows were doing. The Serpent was on the verge of destroying one of the echoes and had already wounded another. Saint was doing worse. Faced with 6 opponents, she couldn't launch a successful attack. Some of the echoes surrounding her were severely wounded, but none seemed to be close to death. That was not her task, though. Actually, Sonny preferred that she didn't eliminate any of the echoes. He wanted them all in one piece, constantly attacking the taciturn knight, landing more and more blows on her shield, the patient avenger. By now, its surface was glowing with an angry orange light, as though there were furious flames burning beneath the cold steel. And there were, in a sense, a string of runes surfaced in his memory. Cold steel enchantment description. This shield can store a portion of impact damage it receives to augment another weapon of its wielder or unleash an immolating wave of fire. Well, by now, the patient avenger received more than enough impact damage to unleash an ocean of flame. A few more strikes, and it was going to overload, sending all that fire outward. Just as Sonny thought that, 2 more strikes landed on the shield, and the angry orange glow turned brighter, slowly turning incandescent white. Currently, Saint was wielding the Blood Blossom charm as well. With all the dismembered corpses lying around, its enchantment had long reached its limit. Augmenting all the memories, the shadow wielded with rampant strength. Sonny blocked Pierce's strike and slid back, his hands trembling from the force of it. At the same time, Saint spun and deflected 2 more swords with her shield. Its surface was almost entirely white now. Sonny muttered that they were almost there, voice faltering. Sonny gave a mental command, and the shadow that had been augmenting Saint flowed from the graceful demon's body onto the furiously shining shield. Another blow landed on the patient avenger. Saint braced, putting her shoulder behind it. Sonny spat a sharp curse. And in the next moment, a terrifying explosion rattled the entirety of the inner sanctum. Just a moment before the patient avenger detonated, Sonny fell backward and dove into the shadow cast by a wide stone pillar. He noticed a hint of surprise in Pierce's eyes, and in the next second, everything was suddenly drowned by blinding white light. The sound came next, a thunderous roar that would have probably destroyed his ears if he had not turned into a shadow. Then the shockwave arrived, obliterating the pillar and turning it into a mass of flying rubble. Sonny's shelter was destroyed, and he was thrown back into the corporeal world, just in time to be engulfed by a terrifying, immolating flame. Luckily, he had summoned the memory of fire at the very start of the fight. Protected by its enchantment and by the undying chain, Sonny had withstood the terrifying heat. His eyes were tightly shut, and so only his eyelids were singed. The explosion had turned out to be much more powerful than he had expected. Sunny breathed a shaky curse of damnation. Hall was completely decimated. The pillars supporting its ceiling had been destroyed, and its walls had cracked, some sections crumbling completely. The bodies of the murdered lost were practically erased from existence, and everything was obscured by a cloud of stone dust mixed with thin crimson mist, which had appeared after the pool of blood had evaporated. In all this mayhem, Sunny was able to sense a few familiar shapes. The serpent had merged with the shadows before the explosion had hit. So it was unharmed. Saint, however, was not as lucky. Her entire left arm had been torn off at the shoulder, the onyx armor mangled and revealing scorched alabaster skin. Fine ruby dust was flowing from the terrible wound, falling to the floor like a stream of a morbid hourglass, as though counting off how long she had left to live. That was the result of augmenting and overloading an ascended memory. Even the wielder was not safe from the consequences, as it turned out. Sunny's mouth twitched, and he immediately dismissed the taciturn knight, then called back his third shadow. In the short moment before it reached him and wrapped itself around his body, he managed to sense the rest of the devastated hall. The echoes seemed to be obliterated. Welthe was kneeling at a distance, shaken and superficially wounded but still alive. Mordret was sprawled on the floor, seemingly thrown out of his invisibility. Only Pierce was still on his feet. As though not affected by the explosion at all, his armor was battered and scorched, wisps of smoke rising from the cracks, but the master himself appeared unperturbed. In fact, his murderous intensity only grew more suffocating. He was like an impregnable stone cliff that could never be brought down by the raging winds. Not wishing to reveal himself, Sunny suppressed an infuriated growl and silently dashed forward. The silver blade of the cruel sight whistled quietly, shooting toward the bastard's heart, however. At the last moment, Pierce shifted and easily deflected the blow with his sword, throwing the spear off course. His armored fist flashed, flying toward Sunny's head. When the blow connected, Sunny was blinded for a moment. His eyes were still closed, but it was as though something exploded behind his eyelids, and at the same time, his mind blanked. He only felt the world spinning. Disoriented, Sunny continued his lunge and collided with the fearsome master. The impact threw them both to the ground in a clatter of metal. They flew back, then collided against the stone floor. Pierce grabbed Sunny by the throat and drove a knee into his abdomen, causing another explosion of pain to spread through his body and sending him rolling over his head and away. But not before Sunny's free hand snaked toward one of the cracks in the ascended knight's armor and planted something deep into his flesh. A long, narrow needle forged out of black steel, with gold wire wrapped around one of its ends. Driven with all of Sunny's strength, the heavenly burden sunk into Pierce's flesh almost entirely, with only a few centimeters sticking out of his skin and barely visible in the narrow fissure marring the surface of the knight's armor. Of course, such a tiny needle was not going to wound a master seriously or even slow down his movements. But damage was not what Sunny used it for. Rolling on the ground, he twisted and landed on his knees, sliding a few steps back and almost instantly regaining his balance. A few meters away, Pierce was already rising to his feet, too. His eyes were brimming with killing intent, and his longsword was glistening as it reflected the flames burning around them. He was ready to finish this fight. But then something strange happened. The fearsome master suddenly swayed, a confused expression appearing on his face. A moment later, the soles of his armored boots separated from the stone floor and rose into the air. The heavenly burden was the memory Sunny had exchanged for contribution points after helping Master Jet put down the demented awakened Shadow Blade Kurt. Its single enchantment was simple and straightforward. Living beings pierced by the needle would float up and up and up until it was removed. Sunny had acquired it to combine the enchantment with the dark wing and receive the ability to fly out of the sky below if need be, which did not mean that it had no other uses. Pierce was rising into the air, his feet already a full meter above the floor. His initial confusion was gone, and he swiftly looked down at the tip of the needle buried in his flesh. The master's hand shot toward it, but the fingers of his armored gauntlet were too thick and clumsy to dig the needle out on the first try. Sunny had no doubt that he would manage soon. He was also fairly certain that the Ascended Knight possessed at least one memory in his arsenal that would be able to help him either counteract or control the effect of the heavenly burden. However, both of these options were going to require some time, no matter how short. The time that Sunny wasn't going to give him. He thrust his hand forward, sending the moonlight shard flying toward Pierce's eye. Without anything to use as purchase, the knight was deprived of the very foundation of combat ability, the warrior's connection to the ground. He couldn't move to dodge, couldn't control the distribution of his weight to mount an effective defense, and couldn't even use most of his strength. However, Pierce still managed to deflect the ghostly stiletto with his sword, left him open and defenseless to Sunny's true attack. As soon as the moonlight shard left his right hand, Sunny brought his left up and behind him, used all of the strength the three shadows gifted him, sent a flood of essence into his muscles, and cast the cruel sight forward. His throw was performed with perfect form, just like Effie had taught him. At the last moment, the three shadows flowed from his fingers and wrapped themselves around the somber spear's silver blade. Pierce's eyes widened. The cruel sight shot through the air like a black comet and sunk into the fearsome knight's chest. The force of the throw was so great that it went right through his damaged armor, his tough skin and bones, and then his heart. Still affected by the heavenly burden, the master's body was sent flying up with terrifying speed and impaled on the stones, hanging lifelessly from the tall ceiling of the devastated hall. A stream of blood fell down like crimson rain. Sunny staggered, then supported his weight with his hands and let out a shaky breath, whispering for the knight to come on. A moment passed in silence, and then he finally heard the painfully familiar voice. This time, the spell's whisper sounded like beautiful music to his ears.
You have slain an ascended human Pierce. Your shadow grows stronger.
Gods, I actually did it.
Sunny smiled darkly, allowed himself a second of rest, and then rose to his feet, knowing that the battle was not over. Mordret and Welthe were still there, both as deadly as the damned bastard he had just killed. He dismissed the cruel sight and immediately summoned it again, simultaneously checking on his reserve of shadow essence. Sunny had spent a lot, but not so much as to worry. Yet, the soul serpent appeared from the shadows and slithered onto his skin, turning into an intricate tattoo. Still keeping his eyes closed, partially out of caution, and partially because his eyelids were burned and hurt like hell, Sunny extended his shadow sense forward and tried to understand what was happening to the other two participants of this hellish battle. Welthe was standing some distance away from him, swaying. Her hands were pressed against her face. Meanwhile, Mordret. Sunny froze. The female sentinel was dead. He had not noticed it before, but she was laying lifeless on the floor, her neck twisted at an unnatural level. Sunny whispered, asking how this could be. Something was not adding up. How could Mordret lose his only vessel so easily? He had only fought one of the masters. Surely, he had the ability to defeat Welthe one-on-one. Otherwise, what had he been planning to do if Sunny allied with the Knights of Valor? How had he planned to resist both of them, let alone with a third enemy added into the mix? The Prince of Nothing could not have been that weak. Suddenly, a small detail attracted Sunny's attention. One of the sentinel's hands was clenched in a fist, something dangling from it. A piece of a torn chain. Didn't that chain feel awfully familiar? A cold, uneasy feeling appeared in Sunny's chest. He turned his head slightly and concentrated on the last survivor of the Valor forces, searching for. Welthe suddenly laughed. Her voice sounded strange and different, and her amulet, the anvil amulet, was gone. The master lowered her hands and smiled. Mordret let out a satisfied sigh, remarking that that was much, much better.
Mordret, he has taken Welthe.
Sunny shifted, lowering the cruel sight and slightly turning its blade. His heart was full of unease, his mind in the throes of a dark premonition. The banished prince had already been monstrously powerful. How much more deadly would he become in a body of a master? A few things were now clear, at least. Out of the two ascended knights, Welthe had been the more powerful one. Her aspect possessed abilities that could debilitate her enemies, all the while enhancing her own physique. That was why she had been the one to sap Mordret of a large portion of his strength and attack him. And yet, it was strange to see that the Prince of Nothing had struggled to defeat her so much and for so long. If he couldn't win against one of the masters, how had he ever planned to face both? However, if he had decided to take Welthe's body and thus couldn't harm it too much, that would explain his tardiness. Fighting an ascended elite while not being allowed to wound her was a dreadfully harsh task. Had Mordret been aiming for Welthe's body from the start, or had he changed his plans on the fly when the opportunity presented itself? Was his intention to take Sunny as his vessel just a ruse, a misdirection? Or was Sunny still in danger?
No way, he already has a body of a master. There is no reason to abandon it for the sake of mine. Right.
Ah, that is much, much better.
Mordret straightened, then stretched, looking at his own arms with curiosity. He clenched Welthe's fists, then grimaced slightly and let his hands relax. Finally, the Prince of Nothing turned slightly and looked at Sunny with a smile, asking whether Sunny wouldn't say so. Sunny lingered for a moment, then nodded cautiously.
I guess, how does this work exactly? Are you an ascended now?
Mordret's smile widened a little.
So curious. Your inquisitive nature is truly worthy of an academy researcher.
Dodging the questions like always, huh?
Sunny sensed the slender saber laying by the former master's feet, then concentrated on the corpse of the female sentinel for a moment.
So, what now? How are we going to escape this place before the saint arrives?
The Prince of Nothing bent down, picked up the saber and sighed.
Oh, that. Don't worry. I do have a plan. It's just, I'm not sure that you are going to like it very much, Sunless.
Sunny felt cold shivers running down his spine. Mordret's tone was still friendly, but the implication behind his words did not promise anything good.
Bastard, he's going to double-cross me, isn't he?
Well, it's not like Sunny had not been planning to do the same. He gritted his teeth, then said somberly,
We don't have to do this, you know. It is just like you said. There's no quarrel between us. We can just go our separate ways, maybe even work together. For a bit, let's be friends.
Mordret chuckled.
Oh, I would like that very much, but Sunless, if you really want to be my friend, why do you still have your eyes closed?
He took a slightly awkward step forward, as if not yet entirely used to his new body.
It's hard to trust someone who refuses to look you in the eye, you know. Why don't you look at me, Sunless?
Sunny paled, then backed away a little.
I'd rather not, my eyelids hurt.
Mordret grinned.
That is a pity, but oh well. To tell you the truth, we wouldn't have become real friends anyway.
Sunny took another step back, then asked tensely,
Oh yeah, why is that?
The Prince of Nothing stopped smiling. When he spoke, Welthe's voice sounded cold and insidious, full of endless darkness.
Do you take me for a fool? Did you really think that I would not smell the stench of dreamspawn on you? Ha! You better tell me, Sunless. Why did Asterion send you to the Chained Isles? Why hunt down my beast? What is that abomination scheming now?
Sunny scowled, muttering a bewildered question. He was genuinely confused. If his eyes weren't closed, he would be blinking in surprise right now. Did Mordret really lose his mind?
I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. What stench? Why would I be sent by Asterion? I've never met anyone by that name, let alone knowing anything about their schemes. Are you hearing yourself, you lunatic?
Wait a minute. The prince, the dreamspawn, could it be? Mordret froze, then tilted his head a little.
How curious. You can't lie, so this must be the truth. But if you never met Asterion, why do you reek of dreamspawn?
Sunny grimaced, not wishing to answer. However, he had no choice. Surrendering to his flaw, he uttered through gritted teeth.
I may have met another dreamspawn.
The Prince of Nothing raised his eyebrows, surprised.
Really? Who?
Godamit. Sunny clenched his fists, then said darkly.
Nephis.
Mordret frowned.
Nephis of the immortal Flame clan. Wait, she is still alive.
Sunny nodded, and the banished prince threw his head back, laughing.
Oh my. So there is another Dreamspawn walking the dream realm, and she is the daughter of Smile of Heaven and Broken Sword. This must be fate. I wonder if the old bastard knows.
While Mordret was laughing, Sunny was feeling cold all over, not because of this sudden outburst, but because of what the Prince of Nothing had said right before. Sunny muttered to himself, wondering how Mordret could know that he couldn't lie. Since when had Mordret known about his flaw? Had he simply figured it out after watching Sunny for a few months? No, that wasn't possible. Sunny had not spent that much time in the dream realm after escaping the sky below, and especially not communicating with a lot of people outside of selling them real-world items. He had not done anything to compromise himself. What was going on? For a moment, Sunny's heart grew heavy, his mind consumed by murderous darkness. He thought that he had been betrayed again. There were very few people in the two worlds who knew the secret of his flaw. Nephis was one, but she was far away. Kai and Effie probably had their guesses. However, they chose to remain silent out of respect for his unwillingness to speak about this matter. That left only Cassie. Cassie, who was right here in the Night Temple and had already turned on him once. But after thinking about it, a little, Sunny realized that there had been another being who possessed the knowledge of his aspect. The problem was that it had been dead for a long time. The mirror beast, the ascended reflection, had mirrored his aspect, so it had to have glimpsed it somehow. And it was connected to Mordret far more thoroughly than Cassie ever could be. The Prince of Nothing had not known everything about the shadow slave aspect before. Sunny was sure of it. Back in the abyss of the sky below, Mordret had expressed genuine curiosity and surprise about things that he would have already learned otherwise, which meant that he had most likely only received that information after the mirror shard was brought into the Night Temple. It also meant that he was only informed about what the mirror beast had learned, and what had been true then. If this guess was correct, maybe Sunny would be able to use a gap in Mordret's knowledge to his advantage. Or he was wrong and Cassie had really betrayed him again. A lot of things depended on whether or not he was ready to trust her again. His very life, most likely. Sunny frowned, then said, his voice even.
You seem to be having fun, so, now that you know that I have nothing to do with Asterion, whoever that might be, are you going to rethink your previous plans and leave me be?
Mordret chuckled.
What do you think?
Sunny sighed.
Honestly, I don't know what to think anymore, not when it comes to you, at least. You really are a devious bastard, you know that, right? Oh, don't take it as an insult, by the way. Coming from me, it's actually a compliment.
The Prince of Nothing shook his head, then took another step forward.
Well, a mirror can only reflect what is in front of it, sunless. Is it my fault that the things in front of me are cruel, vile, and deceitful? I think not. Then again, maybe it is. Either way, I don't really care. Blame your bad luck for being of use to me, if you wish.
His eyes ignited with a hypnotic scarlet light, and although Sunny's own were closed, he suddenly felt slow and sluggish, strength draining from his muscles. He swayed and used the cruel sight to support himself.
W8, before we start this, answer me one last question.
Mordret smiled.
Sure, why not? What do you want to know?
Sunny strained as if trying to speak. His mouth opened. But instead of saying anything, he simply attacked. The Prince of Nothing laughed, amused by this little deception. His saber flashed forward to meet the blade of the cruel sight. A moment later, though, his laugh abruptly stopped. Sunny had no illusions about his chances in the fight against Mordret. Not when the bastard occupied the body of a powerful master, one whose aspect allowed him to weaken his enemies and strengthen himself, no less. But then again, when had Sunny ever fought fairly? From the start of it, he had been subtly manipulating the banished prince. Every step back he had taken was meant to bring them into the right positions. The angle at which he held the cruel sight had been calculated so that the mirror blade only reflected what Sunny wanted Mordret to see. Or rather, so that it didn't reflect what Mordret was not supposed to see. And at the moment of his attack, his efforts finally paid off, because, in the end, he had chosen to trust Cassie after all. The blind girl silently appeared at the entrance of the hall behind the banished prince. Her eyes were hidden by the silver half-mask, but the polished steel armor and the midnight blue coat were gone. Instead, she was wearing the familiar light tunic and a cloak the color of sea waves. This was the memory gifted to her by Nephi's, one that changing star had received after slaying an awakened terror in her first nightmare. The armor that possessed an enchantment which made enemies less likely to pay attention to its wearer. Unnoticed, Cassie knelt and placed something on the floor in front of her. It was a large wooden box, its surface engraved with a complicated weave of a beautiful but disorienting pattern. The lid was still slightly opened. Rising above the lip by a few millimeters, Sunny suppressed a grin, murmuring his approval of her quick thinking. The box had not been part of the plan, but Cassie seemed to have made a correction when a beneficial opportunity presented itself. The moment the blade of the cruel sight met Welthe's saber, the blind girl grabbed the lid, threw it open, and then poured her soul essence into the box. Inside, the mirror trap was lined with plates of polished silver, each reflecting the one opposite it, thus creating an infinite labyrinth of reflections. The pattern on its surface shined with a pale glow. Mordret staggered, his laughter cutting short. His hand seemed to weaken. Sunny easily pushed the saber aside and thrust his spear forward, aiming to end the fight with one ruthless strike. However, the Prince of Nothing wasn't done yet. He recoiled, narrowly avoiding the killing blow. Even though the tip of the cruel sight pierced Welthe's flesh, the wound wasn't fatal. In the next moment, Mordret disengaged, jumping back and staggering as he raised the saber into a defensive stance. His eyes darted toward the wooden box. Mordret muttered, calling it that cursed thing. Blood was streaming down his side, but the banished prince didn't seem to care. Neither did Sunny. He dashed forward, feinting a downward slash, then turning it into a swift thrust. Who knew how long Mordret would be slowed down by the mirror trap? It hadn't helped the forces of Valor. He had to finish this fast. Mordret barely deflected the attack, moving with visible strain. His mouth twitched, and he suggested that Sunless go and destroy that box.
Hey, Sunless, why don't you go and destroy that box?
Sunny pushed forward, closing the distance between them and simultaneously turning the cruel sight into a sword. It flashed through the air, but was deflected once again. Even with his powers reduced so direly, the prince was still a formidable fighter. Mordret bared his teeth, insisting that Sunless go and kill that little oracle of his.
No, but I must insist. Why don't you go and kill that little oracle of yours?
His eyes gleamed with vicious amusement. Mordret declared that Lost from Light was Sunny's true name, and demanded that he do it.
Lost from Light, that is your true name, is it not? Do it.
Sunny froze. His sword trembled. Then, as his face became pale as a ghost and his pupils widened in horror, he slowly turned, facing Cassie. A strange sound escaped from his lips. Mordret smiled, slightly relaxing his guard. It was at that moment that the cruel sight shot toward his body, easily sliding past the slender saber. Sunny scoffed, suggesting Mordret go to hell, since he already had a master.
Why don't you go to hell? I already have a master.
Indeed, it was as Sunny had thought. Mordret had learned his secrets from the mirror shard left behind by his beast. He didn't really know of his aspect. He only knew of its reflection, and that reflection was incomplete. That was why the cunning prince had assumed that he would be able to enslave Sunny by using his true name. Of course, Mordret would have been careful, taking the possibility that Lost from Light already had a master into account. But Sunny was half a step ahead. He had doused that caution by being ready to pretend to be enslaved. and then attacked. The cruel sight shot forward, narrowly avoiding the mirror fiend's saber and sinking deep into his flesh. It cut through the enchanted black tunic, pierced Welthe's body, and emerged from her back. Mordret's face contorted, his eyes full of shock and pain. Sonny, of course, couldn't see it, since he was still relying on shadow sense to navigate the world. All he felt was a tremble that went through his enemy's body. A moment later, the Prince of Nothing groaned, a stream of blood escaping from his mouth. Then he lashed out with the saber, forcing Sonny to stagger back. The cruel sight slid out of the terrible wound, wreaking more damage on its way back. Sonny was slightly disappointed that he had not been able to end the fight right there and then, but it hardly mattered. The wound he had delivered was not immediately fatal, but deadly nevertheless. Now, all he had to do was wait for the enemy to bleed out. Even a master's body was not resilient enough to stem the flood of blood he had caused. Mordret, it seemed, realized the same and dashed forward in a desperate attempt to kill Sonny before the blood loss made him too weak. Or so Sonny thought. Sonny breathed a bewildered question. Instead of attacking with the saber, the Prince of Nothing used it to push the cruel sight aside and continued to move forward, eventually colliding with Sonny and grabbing him by the throat. Sonny demanded to know if the prince was crazy. At such a close distance, Sonny had all the advantages. Mordret couldn't slash with the saber, but he could easily bring his short sword back for a killing thrust, long before anyone would have been able to strangle him. This attack made no sense. However, in the next moment, he felt that something was wrong, and then his chest was pierced by a blinding explosion of pain. Sonny screamed and staggered back, falling to the floor. Somehow, against all logic, the Prince of Nothing seemed unscathed again, the bloody gash on his torso gone. Instead, it was as though Sonny had run himself through with a sword. He could feel a deep wound in his chest, even though the surface of the undying chain remained unbroken. Sonny spat a bitter curse. Fighting through the pain, he rolled away, dodging the descending saber. Luckily for him, Mordret did not pursue, instead choosing to dash toward Cassie and the mirror trap. Sonny cursed damned Welthe. Although Sonny was not entirely clear on what had happened and how he had ended up with a hole in his chest, he had an inkling. Welthe's aspect seemed to be all about devoiding the enemy of their power while enhancing your own, almost as though transferring it. A master had 3 aspect abilities. Was her third ability capable of transferring wounds from her body to that of others? If so, was he going to die by his own sword? No, he wouldn't. Unlike Mordret, Sonny was not going to bleed to death. In fact, he was barely bleeding at all. His body was pierced and heavily damaged, but fortunately blood loss was one of the 2 causes of death he was practically immune to, the other being broken bones. The evolved weaves of his body would not allow such a thing to happen. Sonny let out a pained growl. Growling from pain, Sonny stood up and swayed slightly. He didn't feel too well, in fact. He felt pretty terrible. Every breath was torture, and his heartbeat was strange and irregular. Every contraction sent a pulse of suffering rolling through his body. He muttered that it was all right, that he had been through worse, he thought.
It's all right, I've been through worse, I think.
Sonny willed the midnight shard to manifest itself into existence and tried to assess what was happening around him. Mordret was already upon Cassie, his saber flashing toward her neck. The blind girl met his attack with a skillful block, the quiet dancer ringing clearly as it deflected the enemy's blade. The blind girl survived. However, she was pushed back away from the mirror trap. As soon as her hand left the surface of the wooden box and the flow of soul essence was interrupted, the glow of the engraved pattern shimmered, dimmed, and was then extinguished. Mordret sighed.
Not bad, guys. Truly a valiant effort.
He glanced at the mirror trap and then brought the saber down on it, turning the box into a pile of splinters and mangled silver plates. Sonny shuddered. Crap. Released from the burden and back to the full might of his stolen body, the Prince of Nothing inhaled deeply, an expression of delight on his face. Then he turned to Sonny and smiled amicably.
Now, who should I deal with first?
At that moment, the austere Takai finished manifesting itself into existence. The unbroken enchantment activated, filling him with newfound power. Its effect wasn't as incredible as when he had been a mere sleeper, but still quite pronounced. Holding the midnight shard in one hand and the cruel sight in another, Sunny willed the mirror blade to ignite with the incandescent light of the divine flame and grimaced.
Come here, your royal highness. I can promise to kill you quickly.
With Sunny in front of him and Cassie behind, Mordret laughed.
So fun. Ah, what a pity. I am really going to miss you, Sunless.
With that, he blurred and was suddenly just a step away, the slender saber falling down with terrifying speed. The two of them clashed, with one attacking and the other desperately trying to defend. The ringing of steel merged into one deafening sound. Sunny cursed. Although it seemed like an eternity, in fact, just a second had passed. The quiet dancer had not even had time to reach them from the other end of the hall to help. And he really needed help. Perhaps if he had not been wounded and under the debilitating effect of Welthe's aspect, Sunny would have been able to hold his ground against the deadly prince. With 3 shadows wrapped around his body and the gift of the unbroken, his prowess would not have been much less than that of a master. But as things stood currently, fighting against Mordret was like trying to fend off a tornado. He barely managed to deflect the killing blows, but couldn't do anything against the rest of the rain of ruthless strikes. The Prince of Nothing fought with terrifying skill and purpose, not leaving Sunny any chances to retaliate. Well, what else did he expect from the heir of War God? The bastard truly lived up to his lineage. The undying chain held for now, but Sunny knew that it wouldn't be able to protect him much longer. Even when the quiet dancer joined the fray, things didn't change much. Sunny thought feverishly, trying to come up with some trick, some way for him to survive and prevail. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't think of anything he could do to win this fight. It all seemed hopeless. Slowly, a creeping fear settled in his heart. Ignoring it, ignoring the terrible pain nesting in his chest. Sunny gritted his teeth and continued to resist with all his might, all his cunning, and all his will. And it was then that Cassie's voice suddenly reached his ears.
Open your eyes.
He shivered, suddenly experiencing a feeling of terrifying déjà vu. Sunny wondered if she had lost her mind.
Open your eyes, open them, Sunny.
Was Cassie hysterical or planning to kill him? Why else would she give him such stupid advice? Sunny couldn't come up with one logical reason to listen to her. In the end, it all came down to a question of blind trust. He sighed, then strained his singed eyelids and slowly opened his eyes. Mordret's figure came into focus, a surprised and joyful expression on his stolen face. Sunny saw his reflection in Welthe's eyes, clad in the bleak steel of the undying chain. No, it wasn't him. There was another reflection hiding even deeper, almost lost in the darkness. And then it was gone. Something cold and alien entered him through the reflection, sinking deep into the dark depths of his soul. A moment later, the world disappeared. Sunny found himself in the tranquil darkness of his soul sea. It seemed as empty and silent as usual. The 3 black suns burned with dark flames above him, arranged in a perfect triangle, small spheres of light. His memories floated between them like dying stars. The silent waters were vast and motionless, and some distance away, just beyond the periphery of his vision, the rows of lifeless shadows stood unmoving. However, this time something was different. Sunny did not remember entering the soul sea or even wishing to do so. More than that, he couldn't perceive the real world at all. Usually, visiting this place resulted in a strange split of his consciousness, with one part of it exploring the depths of his soul while the other remained aware of his actual surroundings. It was akin to imagining a landscape. Doing so did not turn you blind and deaf. But now, he was here and only here. As nothing existed outside of this dark and silent sea, come to think of it, it was a lonely and frightening place. Untethered from the real world and surrounded by nothing except for deathly silence, Sunny did not feel as calm and comfortable as he usually would. And he wasn't really alone in the darkness.
What a strange soul you have.
Hearing those words, Sunny flinched, then turned around. The voice that had spoken them did not belong to Welthe, It was familiar and pleasant, just like it had been in the lightless abyss of the sky below. Mordret was speaking with his real voice once again. The Prince of Nothing stood some distance away, looking up with a curious smile on his face. Now, for the first time, Sunny saw how he must have looked before his true body was destroyed. Mordret was tall and slender, with pale skin and raven-black hair. He seemed to be in his 20s, older than Kai and Effie by a couple of years. His face was sharp and thin, not exactly handsome, but at the same time charming and strangely beautiful. His most striking feature, though, were his eyes, which didn't seem to possess a color of their own, and instead reflected the world back on itself like two pools of liquid silver. Currently, they were as dark and lightless as the endless abyss of the void. Mordret was dressed in a simple tunic, its fabric long devoid of any color. He wore no armor and didn't seem to bear any weapon. However, Sunny could feel immense pressure radiating from his slender figure and knew that he was in mortal danger. What surprised him, however, was that Mordret's face seemed familiar. In fact, he looked exactly like a slightly older, male version of Morgan of Valor. The resemblance was too striking to be a coincidence. It could only be shared by siblings. And there was another thing that Sunny saw which made him tense and apprehensive. All around the Prince of Nothing, he could see a pale golden glow, the same kind of beautiful radiance that hid in his own blood and surrounded Nephi's. The light of divinity. Sunny breathed a quiet curse. Mordret studied the three cores of Sunny's soul curiously, then looked at him with a friendly smile.
I have never seen anything like it. How kind it was of you to invite me inside, Sunless. I really do wonder what your little friend was thinking, though. Does she, perhaps, think that you will be able to resist me?
Sunny stared at the invader somberly, then shrugged.
How would I know what she is thinking? Trying to understand an oracle is a fool's errand, you know.
Mordret chuckled.
Ah, wiser words have never been said. Well, I guess we will find out soon.
Sunny shifted slightly, then asked, his voice gloomy.
Why would you even want to possess my body anyway? Didn't you get Welthe already? What's so great about it that you would rather have me than a master?
The Prince of Nothing smiled.
Who says I can't have you both?
That seemed like an answer, but actually it wasn't. Sunny had already experienced Mordret's habit of dodging questions to be misled this way. He frowned and glared at the mirror fiend, unamused. The invader laughed.
So serious. Don't sell yourself short, Sunless. You might be just an awakened, but then, who else should I make a vessel if I wish to ascend myself? Plus, your body suits my current needs perfectly. You have an aspect that gifts you both stealth and teleportation abilities. A perfect combination for someone who wishes to escape a saint, don't you think?
He took another step forward and continued.
I also have never met or heard of anyone else who possesses a divine aspect. Imagine my surprise when I found out that you were just like me. And that thing you have, I'm very curious to find out what it is that allowed you to make me blind back in the Ebony Tower. Such a powerful anti-divination artifact will make my life much easier. So, you see, although I'm not too happy about it, taking you as a vessel is a regretful, but inevitable choice I had to make.
Sunny narrowed his eyes, trying to understand what Mordret was talking about, making him blind. Back in the Ebony Tower, Sunny had worn Weaver's mask to read the harrowing runes on the 5th level of the stronghold of the ruler of the underworld. Was that what the mirror fiend meant? So the mask had been able to hide Sunny from his spying as well. And more than that, the mirror beast had not managed to glimpse its secrets. So Mordret did not know what it was, just that there was something in Sunny's possession that could prevent him from being tracked and seen by otherworldly means. When he narrowed his eyes, though, something else happened. Sunny didn't expect it, so he almost lost his composure. He had not known that he possessed such an ability. But it seemed that the evolution of the blood weave had enhanced his eyes as well. Suddenly, he was able to peer beneath the surface of Mordret's soul, just like he was able to peer beneath the surface of memories and echoes to study their weaves. And what he saw there made him tremble. Sunny muttered a sharp curse. As a living soul, the Prince of Nothing did not possess a spellweave, of course. However, what he did possess were soul cores. 6 of them. Mordret was a terror, and that terror was getting closer and closer to Sunny.
To tell you the truth, Sunless, your body fits me so perfectly that I even thought, for a second, that the old man had sent you to me as a gift. Gods know he has a lot to apologize for. To think that he had nothing to do with it, and all of this was just a coincidence. That funny attribute of yours is really something, isn't it?
Sunny gritted his teeth, and then said in a grim tone,
That is really wonderful. I am very glad for you, pal. However, what exactly happens now? You don't really expect me to just surrender my body to you, right?
Here in the Soul Sea, Sunny wasn't bound by his flaw since his words were nothing more than thoughts. It was actually a bit of a relief. Mordret stopped, now just a few steps away from him, and smiled.
Now? Why, what else? Now I'm going to destroy your soul, of course.
Sunny looked down on himself, evaluating his own state. The wound in his chest was gone. However, it wasn't as though he was unscathed. His body, or at least this manifestation of it, seemed battered and beaten. However, it was also full of ferocious strength and vigor, as well as feeling light, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted off his shoulders just a few moments ago. He didn't know how exactly this battle of the souls was supposed to work, but suspected that his current form was a representation of his spirit. He had endured a lot in these recent weeks, enough suffering and fear to crush someone with a lesser will. Sunny, however, had survived far worse, so his strength was not diminished by much. He was still clad in the bleak steel of the undying chain and holding his weapons. 3 shadows lay at his feet, and he could feel the presence of the soul serpent nearby. His enemy, meanwhile, was alone and unarmed. This was Sunny's soul, after all. Here, he was bound to have the ultimate advantage.
Let's see who will destroy whom, you bastard.
With a smirk, Sunny commanded the shadows to rise and wrap themselves around his body. Instantly, his strength, speed, and resilience were enhanced manifold. In the next moment, however, his expression froze. Mordret looked at him, then smiled. As he did, the 6 shadows descended upon him like a dark mantle, making the pressure that the Prince of Nothing exerted feel almost suffocating.
You didn't think that it would be that easy, did you?
A split second later, he was beside Sunny, his fist crashing into the breastplate of the undying chain. As pain exploded through his body, Sunny flew back and fell onto the still water, sliding across it into the darkness. Before he could even rise, Mordret was already upon him, his foot slamming into Sunny's ribs. Sunny yelped as he was thrown into the air, then felt another blow landing on his chest, pushing all air out of his lungs and sending him plummeting back down. Knowing that he had to escape somehow, Sunny dove into the shadows and emerged from the darkness behind the Prince of Nothing, the blade of the cruel sight shooting forward. However, it pierced nothing but air. Mordret had turned into a shadow himself, and disappeared without a trace, his laughter echoing across the surface of the silent sea.
Wake, to wake.
Something struck Sunny in the back, sending another explosion of pain rolling through the very core of his being. He groaned and tried to slash with the midnight shard, but the enemy was already gone. A moment later, he was kicked in the abdomen, then ruthlessly slammed across the face. Mordret's fist felt like a sledgehammer, no, like a mountain descending. Half blinded and disoriented, Sunny fell to his knees, spitting blood. This was not how he had imagined things going. The damned mirror fiend clearly had to weaken his prey before attacking, so his victory was not set in stone. There was a way to defeat him, somehow, and since Sunny's spirit had not been broken, he had expected to be able to prevail. However, the bastard was just too powerful. How was he supposed to resist such terrifying force? Worse than that, Mordret seemed to be able to mirror all of his powers. The Prince of Nothing laughed again, then struck Sunny in the side of his head, almost blinding him.
Sorry to say this, but that trick is not going to work. This is an entirely different situation, you know.
Hurting and hoping to escape the next blow, Sunny turned into a shadow again. This time, however, he wasn't in a hurry to attack and remained incorporeal, thinking. before he could form a single thought. However, another shadow lunged at him from the darkness, and suddenly, he was in the throes of indescribable agony, his very soul damaged and cracked. With a stifled shriek, Sunny escaped the shadows and assumed his human form again, only to be ruthlessly struck down a moment later. He fell on his back and desperately gulped for air, but his lungs seemed to be paralyzed. All he could do was try to block the next blow, only for it to fail and another wave of pain spread through his body. Sunny used Shadow Step to disengage, but his enemy simply followed. He deflected one strike, almost managing to cut Mordret's forearm open, but the Mirror Fiend was just too fast, strong, and skilled. No matter how hard Sunny fought, it was all useless. No matter what strategy he tried to implement, Mordret saw right through it. Fighting against the Prince of Nothing was like fighting against death itself. He was terrifying, inevitable, and final. There was no escape. But Sunny was not going to give up. At this point, he wasn't even sure that he knew how. He gritted his teeth, endured the pain, and fought. After what seemed like an eternity, beaten and bloodied, Sunny was thrown down again. The helmet of the undying chain was bent and deformed, pressing into his temple and obstructing his vision. He dismissed it and raised a hand to defend himself, but it was easily wrestled down. Mordret had a few bruises of his own, but looked infinitely better than Sunny. Grabbing him by the throat, the banished prince inhaled deeply, and then asked in a somber tone,
"Haven't you had enough? Why don't you just surrender? I'm not enjoying this one bit, you know."
Sunny looked at him through the red haze and grinned, his teeth painted red by blood.
Really? Too bad, 'cause I'm actually having the time of my life."
With that, he lowered his head and tried to sink his teeth into Mordret's hand. The Prince of Nothing sighed, then hit Sunny in the face, sending him rolling away. Sunny slid a few meters and came to a rest just beyond the rows of silent shadows. He tried to stand up, but the world suddenly spun around, making him fall back down. A quiet groan escaped from his lips. Mordret shook his head dejectedly, and then walked over to the cruel sight, which lay on the surface of the tranquil waters where Sunny had dropped it. He bent down to pick it up, but the somber spear simply turned to tenebrous mist, dismissed by its master. The Mirror Fiend remained unperturbed. He lowered his fingers into the water and caught the reflection of the fearsome memory before it fully dissipated, then brought it up, ending up with the exact same spear in his hand.
To think that the spell would make it anew and return it to me. It's fitting, I guess.
He studied the cruel sight for a moment, then turned to Sunny, a dark look in his eyes.
Let's end this now. No matter what you may think, I don't enjoy torturing people. Unless they deserve to be tortured, of course.
Sunny finally managed to rise to his knees and glanced at the approaching prince with a grim expression. One of his hands reached toward the hilt of the midnight shard, which lay some distance away, while the other was pinned awkwardly behind him. In it, a ghostly stiletto silently appeared, its transparent blade hidden from sight by Sunny's body. Mordret willed the cruel sight to extend to its full length, then lunged forward, thrusting it toward Sunny's heart. Sunny tensed, preparing to dodge. But before he had a chance to, he was suddenly covered by a massive shadow, and a long, multi-jointed arm appeared from somewhere above, blocking the blade of the spear with its terrifying bone claws. Sunny blinked. Mordret froze too, and then slowly looked up. As he did, Sunny mirrored the movement. Towering above him, the shadow of the Mountain King stood silently, one of its 4 arms extended forward. For a moment, nothing happened. And then another shadow moved slightly, clicking its chitinous claws. One of the carapace scavengers took a small step forward. Like a chain reaction, a wave of movement spread through the ranks of the silent shadows, bringing them to life. All of them shifted, their gazes focusing on Mordret. Members of the Carapace Legion, dwellers of the Crimson Labyrinth, horrors of the Dark City, inhabitants of the Chained Isles. There were monsters of all shapes and sizes, each more terrifying than the other. A horde of creatures that Sunny had slain. There was an abominable spire messenger, a nest of slithering vines, a tall knight in a heavy suit of intricate armor, a strange creature with a chest in place of a head, and many, many more. For the first time, confidence drained from Mordret's face and he paled. Taking an involuntary step back, The Prince of Nothing hesitated, then said evenly,
Sunless, my dear friend, tell me, why is there an army of dead nightmare creatures hidden in your soul?
Sunny finally managed to grab the midnight shard and slowly rose to his feet, using the takai as support. His teeth flashed in a dark smile.
Oh, I have human souls here too, so don't you worry, Mordret. When I kill you, you'll have good company at least.
The mirror fiend chuckled nervously, then slowly brandished the reflection of the cruel sight. In the next moment, the horde of shadows surged forward, descending upon him like an avalanche of darkness, and Mordret suddenly vanished without a trace, as if he had never existed. Sunny opened his eyes, disoriented. The orange glow of the fire and the dancing shadows on the shattered walls, the smell of blood, the tearing pain in his chest. He had escaped the soul sea and returned to the scorched heart of the night temple. He had prevailed. But what was going on? It felt as if he was falling. Why was he falling? Sunny crashed onto the cracked stone plates of the floor and heard Welthe's body falling somewhere nearby. A tortured groan escaped from his lips, and then a stifled curse. Although his battle with Mordret had lasted for a while, it seemed that just a single moment passed in the real world. That time had not even been enough for Sunny to properly fall down. The quiet dancer was still in the same position, and Cassie was still rushing over, dagger in hand. However, why did it feel like he was forgetting something? Sunny strained his wounded body, trying to sit up. He felt exhausted and weak, both from his physical injuries and the damage his soul had sustained in the harrowing battle against Prince of Nothing. What was it? Cassie was already by his side, reaching out to help him sit. Her rapier hovered in the air, and then turned, the tip of its blade aiming at Welthe's unmoving form. Suddenly, his eyes widened. Sunny raised his head, pointing at Welthe. The quiet dancer was already flashing through the air, reacting faster than its master. Cassie frowned.
What isn't he do?
But it was too late. Welthe suddenly moved, her hand shooting forward to catch the flying rapier by the blade. The sharp point stopped just a few centimeters away from her throat. No, Mordret wasn't dead. He had simply run away, retreating from a fight that he knew he wouldn't be able to win, back to his previous vessel. Cassie stared at the Prince of Nothing in shock, and then shrieked when thin cracks appeared on the blade of the graceful rapier. She hurriedly dismissed the echo, saving it from the crushing grip, and pulled Sunny to his feet.
What do we do now?
Sunny saw the body of the ascended knight stirring as if slowly coming back to life. Her hollow eyes suddenly glistened, becoming full of dark will and lethal intelligence once again. His heart skipped a beat. Now that Mordret had failed to both enslave and possess Sunny, there was only one use for him left: torture the Weaver's mask out of him, and then dispose of what was left, with that fiend wearing a master's body. What were they supposed to do, indeed? Actually, Sunny had a perfect answer. He glanced at Cassie with a determined expression, and then screamed.
What else do we run?
Mordret wasn't the only one who knew when to remove himself from a hopeless situation, pushing the blind girl toward the large hole in the wall of the former stronghold of the Valor forces. Sunny turned his back on Welthe, who was slowly rising to her feet, and sprinted away as fast as he could. His eyes were tightly shut so that the bastard couldn't spy on them through the reflections. The Night Temple was a large place. With some luck, they would be able to play cat and mouse, or rather, mice and tiger, with the damned prince for a few days. Hopefully, Saint Cormac would arrive soon. As he was diving through the breach in the wall, a mocking voice assaulted him from behind.
What? Leaving so soon?
Feeling Mordret taking a step forward, Sunny dismissed the heavenly burden. Pierce's corpse, which was still pressed against the ceiling, suddenly plunged down and crashed right in front of the mirror fiend, forcing him to jump back and slow down a little. Without turning his head, Sunny threw the broken oath behind him, then sent the ordinary rock flying into the depths of a random corridor and ran in the opposite direction with Cassie. As they rushed away, the rock ricocheted off the walls and screamed loudly in Sunny's voice.
Run.
Sunny didn't expect his tricks to slow down Mordret for long, but with enough of a head start, they were bound to be able to disappear into the confusing labyrinth of the great cathedral. They just had to get out of the inner sanctum in time. Once outside, catching them would be much harder. He might not have been a match for the Prince of Nothing in direct combat, for now. But when it came to stealth and traversal, Sunny had a decisive advantage. Not only could he use Shadow Step to jump across large distances, but he could also use his shadows and senses to scout, spy on the enemy, and navigate in the darkness. Mordret, meanwhile, was only able to see through reflections, which were few and far between in the Night Temple. Hiding from him was not an impossible task, especially with the help of Cassie and her uncanny intuition. The blind girl was going to slow Sunny down somewhat, but at the same time, having her with him was a boon. Just as he thought that, Cassie suddenly pulled him into a barely visible mouth of a narrow corridor, which then led them to a small staircase. They ascended it and ran through a circular hall, sliding down the domed floor and then climbing back up. As they did, an echo of a deafening crash reached their ears, announcing that the Prince of Nothing was not too far behind. What was the bastard doing, breaking through stone walls instead of searching for a path? The interior of the citadel was bizarre and confusing, so Sunny quickly lost his sense of direction. All he knew was that they weren't moving toward the familiar exit out of the inner sanctum, nor were they approaching the central bell tower. His doubts were dispelled, however, when Cassie opened a narrow wooden door and cold wind hit him in the face. Somehow, they had reached the grand hall of the cathedral, where the broken gateway stood in the center of the vast basin of the craterous dome. Instead of entering it through the tall gates of the inner sanctum, Sunny and Cassie appeared on a hidden gallery circling the hall's perimeter high above. Almost at the same time, a familiar figure emerged from the gates far below. Mordret was right below them, walking out into the great hall of the somber cathedral at a relaxed pace. Above his shoulders, a dozen blinding orbs of light hovered in the air, throwing white reflections of the dark stones. Sunny silently stepped back, pulling Cassie with him. Pressed against the back wall of the gallery and safely hidden in the deep shadows, they slowly moved away. Below, the spheres of light suddenly shot in different directions, illuminating a large portion of the dark nave. Luckily, their radiance did not reach the hidden gallery, be it just barely. What it did reach, though, were the hundreds of mirror shards scattered around the vast expanse of the inverse hall. Each of them shone, reflecting the white light. It was as though countless stars suddenly ignited in the darkness. Sunny silently cursed, knowing that those shards served Mordret as eyes, who knew how many more were hidden throughout the cathedral. Without slowing down, he dismissed the memories he had left behind, and continued moving toward the distant end of the vast circular chamber. The Prince of Nothing, meanwhile, tilted his head a little.
Where are they hiding, I wonder?
Suddenly, he was surrounded by a whirlwind of white sparks. Sunny did not linger to see what memories Mordret was summoning, and instead concentrated on reaching another door. Before the sparks of light coalesced into tangible shapes, Cassie and he had already left the gallery, finding themselves in another corridor. They had successfully left the sanctum behind and were now in the main structure of the citadel. It was a large and convoluted space, so finding them here was not going to be easy. From where they stood now, just outside the nave, they could go anywhere in the temple proper, exit into the outward ring, or descend into any of the 6 belfries. They could even circle back and try to hide in the 7th, the main bell tower, hoping that the mirror fiend would not expect them to return. However, somehow, Sunny doubted that escaping Mordret would be that easy. The morbid remains of his butchered victims were all around them after all. None of these people had escaped. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled Cassie in the direction of the outward ring. That was the part of the citadel they both knew the best, which was an important advantage. Of course, the banished prince understood that too, which meant that he would most likely be moving there too. This was a risk Sunny had to take. At the end of the day, their goal was to escape, and they could only do that by reaching the sealed gates of the Night Temple. A few hours passed, suffused with fear and tension. Sunny and Cassie had moved through the main structure of the cathedral, getting closer and closer to the outward ring. On the way, they took a short break, partially to eat and replenish their strength, but mostly because he simply couldn't walk anymore. The exhaustion and pain were taking their toll on Sunny. Finding a safe spot, he fell to the floor and remained motionless for a while, breathing hoarsely. Then he dismissed the breastplate of the undying chain, pulled the shirt hiding beneath up, and tentatively explored the dire wound dealt to him by Mordret. The result was not too good. Sunny wasn't going to die anytime soon, but neither was he going to heal quickly. For the time being, he was as good as crippled. At least he had not bled to death. That was something, at least. He summoned the breastplate back, then opened the covetous coffer and took out a couple of tubes of synth paste. The two of them hurriedly consumed the nutritious sludge, and then it was time to get back up again. Before that, however, Cassie handed him something.
I'm here, you hold on to this.
Sunny took the item and raised his eyebrows, recognizing the shape. It was a small piece of cold steel, shaped into a semblance of an anvil. His fingers, though, could feel that the thing was not at all simple. In fact, it seemed like one of the most potent artifacts he had ever held. The blind girl sighed.
After you opened your eyes, I should have tried to reach his body in time instead. If only I had more essence, I could have seen, could have done something differently.
Sunny hesitated for a moment, then threw the amulet into the maw of the covetous coffer.
Why are you so down? Yeah, we might have failed to get rid of that bastard, but then again, we've done better than 100 lost and 2 Knights of Valor did. That's not too bad of an achievement, isn't it? Plus, Mordret's plans are also ruined. He might seem in control, but trust me, that guy is in as much trouble as we are. Things didn't exactly go his way either.
The blind girl remained silent for a few moments, then nodded and helped him stand up. Somewhat rested, but not at all free of exhaustion, they continued moving forward, soon crossing into the outward ring. When they did, however, Cassie suddenly froze, then trembled. Sunny tensed. Then he heard it too, the insidious sound of approaching footsteps. And a second later, Welthe's familiar voice.
There you are.
Gritting his teeth, Sunny grabbed Cassie's hand and ran in the opposite direction. His chest was burning, pulsating with excruciating pain. They moved with all the speed they could muster, but what was the point? A master was so much faster than an awakened. Even though Mordret didn't seem to be in a hurry, the sound of his footsteps was growing closer and closer. Before he could reach them, however, the whole night temple suddenly shook, throwing Sunny to the floor. An explosion of pain radiated through his body, and a moment later, his shadow sense was not constrained by the outer walls of the citadel anymore. It pierced the black stone and easily reached into the vast emptiness beyond. Sunny clenched his fists. The saint had arrived. At that point, Sunny and Cassie weren't too far away from the gate chamber, where they had made a morbid discovery soon after escaping from the cage. Back then, the heavy gates had been closed and sealed. Now, however, it seemed that they were finally opened. St. Cormac had returned from his expedition to the Hollow Mountains a few days sooner than expected. For a moment, Sunny was overcome by fierce joy. Then, however, the cold and rational part of his mind took over. Yes, the arrival of the saint created a path of escape and was bound to solve their Mordret problem, most likely. But who was to say that the transcendent warrior would not turn out to be an even deadlier threat? The first thing St. Cormac was going to see after entering the citadel was a pile of mutilated corpses. After that, he would most likely kill anyone who appears in his way. After all, any survivor would either be a potential vessel of the banished prince or a witness. Sunny gritted his teeth, then rose to his feet and pulled Cassie into a side corridor. There, they hid in the shadows, wrapped her cloak around themselves, and waited. He didn't dare to extend his shadow sense toward the gates or send his shadows forward to scout, fearful to draw the saint's attention. So neither of them knew what was going on. A few seconds passed in terrifying silence, and then Sunny heard something rustle through the corridor they had just left. A gust of wind blew past them, as if left behind by something moving at incredible speed. A moment later, they heard a distant impact, and the night temple trembled once again. It seemed that St. Cormac had already found Mordret. Sunny pushed Cassie to her feet and hissed.
Hurry him to the gates.
They ran toward the exit. Soon, the familiar chamber came into view, fresh air mixing with the terrible smell of the rotting corpses. The gates of the night temple stood wide open, the impenetrable darkness of the sky below stretching into eternity beyond them. The tall doorway seemed like a portal into the endless night. Now slowing down even for a moment, Sunny and Cassie dashed toward freedom, passed through the gates, and finally escaped the cursed cathedral. After a month of suffering, bloodshed, and harrowing dread they had experienced in this ghastly stone trap, the air of the lightless abyss seemed sweet like nectar. Just as they left, the night temple shuddered once again, dust falling from its ancient walls. Far below, the bells rang somberly, their usually melodious song sounding strangely staggered and frantic. The saint was battling the Prince of Nothing, the whole citadel suffering the burden of their furious clash. The two of them dashed across the rickety bridge that swayed above the chasm of the sky below on rusty chains, and soon reached the treacherous stairs that skirted the slope of the northern island. Running up the narrow steps, both of them knew that one wrong step can potentially cost them their lives. But Sunny was unwilling to slow down. They had to reach the surface, cross the island, traverse the heavenly chain, all before Saint Cormac was done dealing with the escaped prisoner. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then summoned the heavenly burden. Cassie lingered, then did as she was told. He drove the black needle between the plates of the undying chain, cursed, and then threw his hand forward, the triangular blade of the prowling thorn shooting into the overhanging stone slope. With the blind girl's weight added to his own, the speed of their ascent wasn't too fast. However, with the help of the kunai and its invisible string, Sunny was able to increase it somewhat. It was an arduous and nerve-wracking journey. The two of them were like a spider scaling a mountain with the help of a single thread of silk. The difference was that the mountain was steeper than vertical, and there were furious winds threatening to either crush them against the stones or throw them away into the darkness of the sky below. However, after a dozen torturous minutes, or maybe an eternity, they still managed to reach the surface of the island alive. Sunny dismissed the needle and fell onto the soft ground, gripping his chest. There were disturbing, wheezing sounds coming out of his lungs with each breath. He lay motionless for a few moments, then allowed Cassie to pull him to his feet. They ran across the field of flowers, the hollow mountains towering behind them. White mist was flowing down their slopes, and there was something white dancing in the air in front of them too. Sunny felt a pleasant cold spreading across his burning face. His heart contracted painfully. Was it December already? Or did the first snowfall arrive ahead of time as well? There was no escaping fate. The northern island trembled beneath them, and just a few moments later, a dark figure appeared in their way. Sunny had never met Saint Cormac, but he recognized him almost instantly. Only a transcended could have such a deep, unfathomable shadow, and a presence that seemed to affect the very world around him. The saint looked to be in his 30s, with a cold face and dark, ruthless eyes. His black armor was battered and worn, barely holding together after a month of exploring the death zone. Surprisingly, it wasn't too impressive as far as armor-type memories went. Neither was he wielding a terrifying weapon. His fingers, however, were covered with fresh blood, crimson drops falling down and painting the delicate violet flowers red. It seemed that Mordret had failed to gain freedom in the end. His last vessel was destroyed. Saint Cormac frowned, looking at the two of them, then took a step forward. The snow swirled, surrounding him like a cold mantle. Sunny was suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling of suffocating killing intent. He shifted slightly, pushing Cassie behind him. His eyes darted around, hoping to find something, anything, that would save their lives. Then suddenly the world darkened, as though a transient shadow covered the sun. A second later, the shadow was gone in a rustle of wings, and a tall, slender woman was standing between them and the approaching saint. Her posture straight like an arrow. Sky Tide shielded Sunny and Cassie with her body and glanced at the other transcended warrior, her beautiful face as cold and stark as always, her vertical pupils full of calm, grim resolve.
That is enough, Cormac, turn back.
Sunny staggered back, stunned by the sudden appearance of Saint Tyrus. A tense, dangerous silence settled over the island after she spoke, with only the wailing of the wind breaking it. Snow danced in the air, slowly settling onto the cold ground. His heart was beating like a caged animal. Cormac scowled and looked at the slender woman with a dark expression on his stern, weathered face. The saint did not seem amused by the sudden appearance of the leader of the White Feather clan. "Sky Tide, stay out of this." Saint Tyrus didn't move, still shielding Sunny and Cassie with her slender body. The wind picked up, and the clouds seemed to become heavier, as if expressing her suppressed emotions. Only as Sunny realized they weren't suppressed at all. Sky Tide just didn't show them on her face. Instead, the world itself did it for her.
I think not.
Cormac winced, resentful sparks appearing in his eyes. "You don't know what you are interfering with, Tyrus. Get out of my way. This is not your business." She shifted slightly, the howling of wind growing louder. The violet flowers bent, pressed down to the ground.
This is my land. These awakened are of my citadel. Anything that happens here, and to them, is my business.
The other saint sighed, then took a step forward. The entire garrison of the Night Temple was wiped out. These two are the only witnesses. Are sure that you want to make their fate your burden. Skytide frowned, then spoke, her voice even.
If that is true, we can question them together, back in the sanctuary.
Cormac smiled darkly, then shook his head. I'm afraid that won't be convenient. You might not know my task here, Tyrus, but you know who gave it to me. Obstructing me in this matter is the same as obstructing the will of Valor. You wouldn't want to do that, would you? A corner of Skytide's mouth suddenly twisted upward. She stared at the fearsome saint and said, a hint of mocking in her voice.
What is he going to do? How is he going to punish me? Exile my clan to a remote frontier region maybe? Oh, wait.
She took a step forward, as well her tone changing, becoming darker and heavier. The clouds swallowed the sun, submerging the world into shadows.
You have forgotten, Cormac. I am Skytide of the White Feather clan, not Valor. I am a vassal of the king, not his servant. 6 years ago, I looked the other way and allowed your odious scheme to happen. I have regretted it ever since. This is my land, my isles. You are only a guest here. I warn you, do not test the limits of my hospitality.
As he spoke the last words, a deafening thunderclap resounded, rolling across the chained aisles like a herald of heavenly wrath. Cormac stared at her, unimpressed. An expression of contempt appeared in the depths of his cold, dangerous eyes. The saint moved his shoulders, as if stretching his muscles, and then said darkly, Your arrogance is so tiresome, Tyrus. Warn me? What gives you the courage to warn me? You say that I have forgotten, but it is you who doesn't seem to remember who I am, and what I am capable of. He stepped forward, his killing intent growing thicker and more suffocating, almost palpable. What gave you the idea that this is a negotiation? You will stand down, or I will put you down. Either way, the result will be the same. Saint Tyrus lingered for a moment, then looked over her shoulder at Sunny and Cassie. Her gaze was calm and somber.
It's time for the two of you to go.
Sunny took a step back, his mouth suddenly dry. He opened it, trying to force out a question.
But what about?
Skytide was already looking at Cormac, who was approaching with steady steps. Her hair danced in the wind like a stream of pale gold.
Run, you won't survive the fury of this battle.
Sunny hesitated for a split second, then grabbed Cassie and ran. They dashed away from the two saints, heading for the distant edge of the island. He didn't know what a fight between transcendents would look like, but had no doubt that mere mortals like the two of them had no place in the middle of it. A moment later, something collided with a thunderous roar behind them, and Sunny was thrown into the air. A violent shockwave passed through his body, causing a short scream to escape from his mouth. He hit the ground and felt it shifting, as if a powerful earthquake was happening mere meters away. Sunny struggled to rise back to his feet, then helped Cassie do the same and continued to run. Shards of stone flew past them like bullets, and the snowfall was already turning into a furious blizzard. Behind them, two vast shadows rose into the sky. One was a giant bird of prey, her feathers white, her sharp beak and devastating talons forged out of lustrous, polished steel. Her enormous wings were wreathed in thunderclouds, and bolts of lightning danced around her body like a radiant mantle. The other was a ferocious wyvern, his black scales as dark as the abyss, with mighty muscles rolling under them like iron chains. The head of the creature was crowned with twisting horns, and in his maw countless sharp fangs glowed darkly, illuminated by immolating red flame burning in the depths of the beast's adamantine body. Tyrus and Cormac flew into the skies, soon disappearing in the veil of storm clouds. A terrifying roar rolled across the island, and then another shockwave hit, tearing a hole in the blizzard. Boiling blood suddenly streamed from above, falling on the snow like vermilion rain. Sunny and Cassie could only run. From time to time, a violent tremor threw them to the ground. The hurricane wind threw snow and sharp bits of ice into their faces, and their ears were ringing from the thunderous cacophony of the titanic battle happening somewhere above them. They were almost to the edge of the island, ready to jump onto the chain when there was a sudden lull in the terrifying havoc. And then, two shadows fell down from the skies, so fast that Sunny couldn't even tell who was who. The saints collided against the center of the island with such force that its surface swayed like water. The shockwave of the impact was so fierce that it instantly obliterated the field of flowers, blew away the top layers of the soil, and made the stronghold on the northern edge crumble into dust. The ground itself split open, a wide crack spreading to both ends of the isle, cutting it in two. The northern island shuddered, and then crumbled, large pieces of stone breaking off and flying into the darkness as more and more cracks appeared, and the tension of the heavenly chains tore the island apart. Sunny, of course, could not appreciate the full scope of the disaster. All he could sense was that they were sent rolling down once again. This time even more violently than before. Only this time, instead of soil or stone, what they found beneath them was nothing. The ground disappeared, and Sunny found himself falling down into the endless darkness of the sky below. All he could do was grab Cassie and hold her close, making sure that they weren't separated. Bloodied, mangled, and weak, they plummeted into the abyss as all around them, devastation reigned. The night temple cracked, then disintegrated into a rain of black stones. The 7 bells rang mournfully as they disappeared into the void. The colossal chain that served as one of the anchors of the chained isles shot toward the hollow mountains, colliding with their slopes with enough force to make the ancient slope shatter and create a momentary hole in the veil of flowing mist. Luckily for Sunny, his eyes were still closed, so he didn't see what hid beneath. And somewhere in all this chaos, the two saints continued their harrowing battle. Sunny held Cassie tightly and fell, happy to be getting further and further away from that clash with each second. After a while, the sounds of the fighting disappeared far above. The signs of destruction disappeared, too, as well as the last remnants of the light. Now they were falling through absolute darkness in complete silence and solitude, with nothing threatening their lives. It was sort of peaceful. Sunny sighed, finally allowed himself to open his eyes, then glanced at Cassie and forced out a weak smile.
"Oh, see, we're not dead. Your vision was a bust again."
She trembled.
How are you so calm? We are falling into the sky below, not dead, yet.
He tried to laugh, then winced and decided against it.
"This place is actually not so bad. Just wait for a little. We'll fall for a bit more, and then I'll summon memories to either guide us back up or push us toward the rift. We have food and water at least. You won't believe what I had to eat the last time."
Remembering the dead mimic, Sunny shivered.
"Yeah, this is definitely not bad, believe me. It could have been so much worse."
However, as soon as Sunny said that, something changed in the lightless void. A swift shadow shot toward them, surrounded by a circle of furious light. Before Sunny could even react, 2 hands extended toward them, one grabbing him, the other closing around the nape Cassie's cloak. With nothing to stand on, they were as defenseless as Pierce had been moments before Sunny killed him. He blinked, that voice? Why did it sound familiar? Sunny stared into the light, his eyes slowly adjusting to it. Soon, he was able to see the shape of a paper lantern that floated in the air just above the shoulder of a tall, infuriatingly handsome young man in a needlessly fashionable armor. Sunny opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. The charming archer smiled, an expression of joy and profound relief appearing on his face.
What else? Rescuing you, of course. Hold on for a bit more.
The archer strained a little, bearing their weight as he darted through the abyss, his flight swift and effortless. Illuminated by the paper lantern, the three of them traveled through the darkness like a small comet, moving faster and faster. The wind whistled in Sunny's ears. He remained silent for a bit, dumbfounded, then asked,
Wait, was it you who brought St. Tyrus here?
Kai smiled, looking somewhere far away.
Of course, when you and Cassie didn't return to the real world, we knew that the negotiation with the representatives of Clan Valor must have failed. But when you didn't arrive at Shipwreck Island by November, as the plan had been, it was clear that something went wrong. So, Effie and I waited for a bit, then went to the White clan for help.
He paused for a moment, and then added,
Eventually, we decided to come to the Night Temple ourselves. That was a week ago. We have just arrived yesterday.
But the citadel was sealed.
Sunny frowned, suddenly catching an inconsistency in Kai's words. The archer smiled brightly.
Well, look ahead.
Sunny glanced forward and froze. They were swiftly approaching another source of light, this one much, much larger. Or rather, it was moving in their direction, even faster than Kai was flying. A few moments later, a graceful shape of a resplendent wooden ship became visible, flowing through the darkness of the sky below as though on water. Its sails were pristine white, and around the main mast, a young tree was growing, its branches brimming with vibrant green leaves. The firekeepers had succeeded in repairing the ancient vessel after all, it seemed. It looked elegant and swift, its hull devoid of the cracks and breaches that had marred its surface before. A patchwork of replacement boards still stood out on the polished wood, and here and there, the structure of the ship seemed rickety and slapdash, especially near the bow, which had been previously almost destroyed. However, overall, the vessel was a magnificent sight to behold. There was a battery of light memories illuminating the ship, an especially bright one burning at the tip of a long and sharp bowsprit. Human figures could be seen on the deck moving around in a hurry. Sunny stared at the swiftly approaching ship, stunned by the sight of it. It was hard to believe that this had been the same abomination-invested wreck he knew. Now that the ancient vessel was repaired, it looked almost the same as on the golden coins he had sacrificed to the altar of Noctis. Kai accelerated even more, then slowed down and landed on the wooden deck smoothly. Feeling a solid surface under his feet, Sunny swayed a little and looked at the fire keepers that surrounded them. Then he sighed and fell down, instantly losing consciousness. After the terrible day. No, a terrible month he had. Some rest was long overdue. Couple of hours later, Sunny came back to his senses. He was laying near the main mast of the ship under the branches of the young tree, a soft pillow under his head and a warm blanket covering his body. He still felt terrible, but mostly due to the soul damage Mordret had dealt him. The physical wounds were not bothering him too much anymore. It seemed that while Sunny was out of it, the healer of the fire keepers, Shim, had treated him. I am actually alive. What a miracle. He grimaced and sat up, then stared into the darkness for a bit. The ancient vessel was swiftly flying through the abyss, descending into its depths. Due to that, his body felt nice and weightless. Sunny dismissed the outer layer of the undying chain and studied his chest, where the terrible wound had already closed, be it just barely. Now that he was conscious, he would be able to stitch it up or at least cover the gash with a bandage, as well as properly take care of the countless smaller injuries on his body. Satisfied with his state, Sunny looked around, noticing Cassie sleeping nearby. Her face was calm and peaceful. He remained still for a few moments, coming to terms with the fact that their harrowing adventure seemed to be over. Of course, in the future, He was going to have to deal with its consequences. And even before that, the second nightmare awaited, perhaps much more terrifying. But at least they were free of the damned Night Temple. He didn't get to dwell on his frustration for long, however, because a delicious smell suddenly reached his nostrils, and a few moments later, Effie appeared nearby, carrying 2 plates of somewhat that seemed like real, freshly cooked food. Sonny's eyes glistened, and his mouth instantly watered. The huntress grinned and handed him a plate.
Here you go, doofus. Welcome aboard.
He flashed her a smile and then attacked the food like a ravenous beast. Effie sat down on the deck and placed the second plate near Cassie, who stirred awake soon after. A few minutes were spent in silence, disturbed only by the sound of energetic chewing. At some point, Kai landed nearby and joined them, an easygoing smile on his face. Finally, Sonny was done with his meal and pushed the plate away. She scoffed. He chuckled, then glanced into the darkness that surrounded them from all sides. Kai nodded.
Yes, we are moving down and toward the tier as fast as we can. You will have to guide us to the rift in the flames once we reach them. Whatever had happened in the Night Temple, we thought that ascending should take priority, not to mention that facing the fallout as masters might change everything.
Sonny remained silent for a bit, then smiled crookedly. As soon as he said it, though, his face darkened. Sonny suddenly looked up and then paled a little. They hurriedly stood up and summoned their weapons. The firekeepers did the same, staring into the darkness with tense faces. A few moments later, something landed on the deck with a wet thud. Sharp fangs glistened, reflecting the light of the lanterns. It was the head of a giant black wyvern, torn viciously at the neck. Its eyes were glassy and empty, and its tongue hung lifelessly out of the terrifying maw, the red flames that had once burned within it gone. Saint Cormac was dead. The realization sent a shiver through Sonny's body, and a split second later, Sky Tide was suddenly standing above the head of the slain transcendent, her face cold and expressionless. Tyrus looked battered, her graceful armor torn and bloodied. Her golden hair was disheveled, some strands of it painted red. Her presence, however, was unchanged. It was calm and steady. She looked at the 4 of them and frowned. Then her gaze slid lower and focused on the empty plates.
Do you have more food? Bring it, I am famished.
As the saint ate, not at all perturbed by the head of the terrifying wyvern staring at her with dead eyes, the rest of them stood awkwardly and waited for her to satiate her hunger. Sonny observed Sky Tide with a somber expression, then glanced at what remained of the fearsome transcendent Cormac. His heart was heavy. Damnation. Being the cause of 100 lost and 2 masters dying, one of them by his own hand no less, was already bad enough, not to mention that the whereabouts of the sole prisoner of the Night Temple, Prince Mordret, were currently unknown, also as the direct result of Sonny's actions. But causing the demise of a saint was nothing short of an utter disaster. Saints were irreplaceable. In all of humanity, there were just a few dozen. Cormac's death was not going to go unnoticed. Or unpunished. Sky Tide finally finished her meal, then drank some water and glanced at Cassie and him.
What exactly happened in the Night Temple?
The 2 of them looked at each other. After a few moments, Sonny spoke, his voice somber.
Everything went wrong from the very start. As soon as we arrived, one of the masters discovered a piece of mirror in my belongings. That shard, I picked it up on Reckoning Island. There was apparently a person imprisoned in the citadel, and he escaped his bindings with the help of the mirror I delivered somehow.
He paused and studied the saint's face, trying to ascertain if she had known what would happen. Tyrus certainly knew of the mirror beast. However, she could not have known that Sonny used to carry the mirror shard the creature had left behind. His attempt to read anything on her face failed, so he was left without an answer. With a sigh, Sonny continued.
The masters destroyed the gateway and sealed the temple. After that, the escaped prisoner slaughtered the lost and took possession of a master's body. He even stole the knife from the shattered altar. In the end, it was just the 3 of us left alive, and he would have probably killed us too, but Saint Cormac arrived just in time. You know the rest.
Saint Tyrus stared at him for a few moments, then shook her head.
So the prince still lives, how could this be?
She frowned and looked straight at him.
Where is he now?
Sunny shrugged.
That we don't know. Saint Cormac must have destroyed his body, but as to where his soul went, your guess is as good as mine. He is probably hiding in one of the mirror shards, falling into the sky below with the rest of the Night Temple as we speak.
Skytide remained silent for a while, then sighed.
I see you did well to survive. Don't worry about the rest. There are no witnesses left, and even the citadel itself is gone. I will deal with the fallout as well as I can. However, it will be good for the two of you to disappear for a while. Proceed to the Seat of Nightmare as you have planned and challenge it. By the time you return, if you do, the worst part will be over. The situation will be different too.
She rose and glanced into the darkness of the sky below, a somber expression on her face.
Now that the Hollow Mountain's anchor is no more, the chained isles will shift and change position. That will cause a mass migration of the nightmare creatures, both those from the surface and those from the dark side. Even some of the corrupted abominations might move to new hunting grounds. I will have my hands full for the foreseeable future, so we won't see each other again for a long time. Good luck to you.
Sunny stared at the beautiful saint, then at the head of the wyvern. He cleared his throat.
I am sorry, Lady Skytide, but won't you be in trouble? Killing a saint is not something that can be simply forgiven, no matter your status, right?
Tyrus lingered, then shook her head.
I will be punished, sure, but not too severely. Do you understand why?
Sunny glanced at his friends, who had the same confused expressions. She sighed.
There were 12 saints who swore loyalty to the great clan Valor, one less than those who are sworn to the great clan Song. Now there are 11, while Song still has 13. With Song stationed back from the Forgotten Shore, that number will soon increase even further, while Lady Morgan is still too young and lacks the experience to challenge the third nightmare. The balance of power will be broken.
Sunny listened to her words attentively. So the great clans are at odds with each other. Two strongest are at least. Makes sense. Skytide frowned, remained silent for a few moments, and then said,
With the gap widening so drastically, Valor can't allow to lose me, or any more of their saints, so I will be fine, more or less. That is also the reason why you will be too.
He raised an eyebrow. Tyrus smiled slightly, looking at him, Cassie, Effie, and Kai.
Right now, the four of you are just people who have raw potential. You are valuable but not irreplaceable. However, should you survive the second nightmare and ascend, you will prove that you have the courage, skill, and determination to realize that potential. You will prove that you can be saints, and thus become precious. When you return, the great clans will not only be unwilling to eliminate you, they'll be fighting for the right to have you.
Sunny scowled, connecting that statement with what Master Jet had told him before. His eyes grew bleak. Skytide looked at him for a while, then turned away. Her voice sounded even.
Then you are out of luck.
With that, she jumped up. A gust of cold wind suddenly enveloped the deck of the flying ship, and a moment later, a massive shadow separated from it and shot upward, soon disappearing into the distance. Sunny, Cassie, Effie, Kai, and the fire keepers we left standing in the darkness alone. After some time, the huntress shifted and sighed heavily.
She ate all my food. What a disaster. What a tragedy.
The flying ship soared through the darkness, descending deeper and deeper into the empty void. After St. Tyrus had left, nothing much happened for a long time. They were surrounded by nothing, and nothing bothered them. This was the oppressive nothingness that Sunny was familiar with all too well. However, now, things were different. The first time he had fallen into the sky below, he was alone and desperate, without any way to escape and no certainty of what awaited him below. This time, he was surrounded by people, knew where he was going, and that they would be able to turn back at any point if need be. Not to mention that Sunny had a whole ship to explore, as opposed to plummeting down atop the corpse of a dead devil. The ancient vessel was not giant, but large enough to make their journey rather comfortable. There was an upper deck of the main cargo hold, the lower deck stretching from the bow to the middle point of the ship, the auxiliary cargo holds beneath it, and various compartments near the stern, including living quarters for the crew, 2 separate mess decks, a spacious captain's cabin, several smaller cabins that seemed as though they were meant for either guests or officers, a large war room, and a few service compartments. Currently, there were less than 30 people on board, so there was more than enough space for everyone. In fact, the vessel seemed rather empty and rough around the edges. The members of Cassie's cohort and other fire keepers that joined them to assist in the repairs had done a splendid job of restoring the flying ship's overall integrity, but had had no time to work on its interior. A few essential facilities had been haphazardly outfitted with everything necessary to barely function, but most of the compartments still required a lot of work. There was no furniture of any kind except for some crude tables, chairs, and flimsy hammocks. And most of the vessel looked empty and barebones. It was a far cry from how luxurious it must have been furnished, outfitted, and decorated once in the ancient past. However, after the hellish month Sunny had spent in the Night Temple, this environment seemed almost like paradise. He had a whole cabin to himself, and the cargo hold was stocked with enough food and water to last them for a few months. The galley was also fully operational, so at least their meals were taken care of. More than that, the flying ship did not wobble constantly up and down like a seafaring one would, and instead swayed gently from time to time, which was sort of calming and even a bit cozy. It was a strange vessel that moved partially due to sorcery, the sapling of a sacred tree growing around its mast serving as the source of it, and partially due to the wind. The fire keepers seemed more or less capable of operating the sails, be it somewhat tentatively, and used either their aspects or memories akin to Cassie's wooden staff to produce gales that pushed the ship in the right direction. As the result, their descent into the abyss was swift, smooth, and almost relaxing. Sunny spent around a week slowly recuperating from his wounds, restoring his strength and resting. He slept a lot and ate as much as he could, knowing that the second nightmare was going to test the limits of his endurance. He had to enter it in as good of a shape as he could. He also used that time to think about what had transpired in the Night Temple, analyze everything he had learned about Mordret, and go over each of his thoughts and decisions, trying to learn from his mistakes. The memory of being fooled and manipulated by the Prince of Nothing still haunted him. There was also a lot of new information Sunny had received in that month. Information about the Awaken of higher ranks, Anvil of Valor, the great clans, the tension between them. And even about his own aspect. The silent shadows that dwelled in his soul sea were not there just for decoration after all. He had always suspected that there was a purpose to them, but never had any proof. Well, now there was proof. Sunny just had no idea what it all meant and what he was supposed to do with them. No matter what he tried after the battle with Mordret, the shadows refused to react. They just stood in their usual spots, silent and lifeless just like before. As if pretending that nothing had happened. It was almost like he had imagined the whole thing. In the end, Sunny had to accept the fact that the mystery of the shadows was going to remain unsolved for now. He had learned that his soul had a fearsome defense system against those who would try to possess it. That was something, at least. After the first week, when his injuries healed enough, Sunny started training, slowly conditioning his body for the deadly trial ahead. This was somewhat of a useless process, really, since he would be inhabiting a different vessel entirely inside the nightmare. But training the body helped him put his mind in order as well. For that reason, Sunny practiced with the same ferocious determination as back in the Dark City. Kai, Effie, and Cassie joined him too, working on improving their own condition, as well as learning how to work together as a single unit again. It had been a long time since the four of them fought side by side. All of them had grown since then, both in terms of power and experience. They were awakened now, possessed new abilities, and had improved in their understanding of combat, technique, and skill. They needed to find new and better ways of enhancing each other's strengths and shielding each other's weaknesses, as well as cooperating seamlessly to achieve a common goal. Without the guiding hand of Changing Star, it was much harder than they had remembered. None of them was really a natural leader, let alone one as talented and gifted in the art of battle as Nephi's had been back on the Forgotten Shore. Only now. Faced with her absence, did Sunny understand how hard it actually was to build a powerful, cohesive, and effective cohort. Still, they did their best. A few days before they reached the rift in the divine flames, with the air outside of the flying ship already growing sizzling hot, Sunny woke up and stared into the darkness for a bit, then sighed and went to the galley to find something to eat. The food was tasty but not very luxurious. And once again, he failed to meet this day by drinking a cup of coffee with a lot of sugar and maybe even real milk, as he had wished to do once, a long time ago in the cafeteria of the Awakened Academy before venturing into the dream realm for the first time. Today was the day of the winter solstice. Sunny had turned 19. Last time, he celebrated his birthday in a blood-soaked castle standing in the middle of a cursed city. This time, he was going to celebrate it aboard an ancient ship that flew through a lightless abyss, descending toward an ocean of flames. It is somewhat of an improvement, I guess. Sunny was not going to do anything special on that day, more so because the whole crew was in a bit of a melancholic mood. This was all of theirs first winter solstice after escaping the forgotten shore, so the fire keepers huddled together, remembering their fallen friends and wishing the young sleepers who were going to enter the dream realm come night well. However, Effie and Kai had other plans. It seemed that Cassie had told him that this was his birthday, so the huntress cooked up something special. And the four of them had a comparatively lavish dinner on the smaller mess deck, sharing the tales of what had happened to them in the past year and laughing about this and that. Laughter was much better than sorrow, especially considering that none of them knew when they would have an opportunity to laugh again. On the next day, the dark void around them was already hot enough to make moving on the upper deck hard. All of them dismissed most of their armor and worked the sails, their bodies glistening with sweat. Everyone worked together to keep the ship afloat and moving in the right direction, divided into two shifts. One would control the vessel, while the other retreated inside to cool off and drink water. Luckily, with the hot air blowing from below, they didn't need all of the sails to achieve their goal, which made things easier. It had taken Sunny almost a month to reach the divine flames before, but the flying ship made the journey faster, using several aspect abilities and ingenious tools. They were also able to navigate the abyss with a sufficient level of precision, quickly reaching the tier and continuing to descend in a wide spiral. The memory of the golden string of fate was still burned into his mind, so, by knowing where the twisted rock had been located in relation to their position, Sunny was able to guide the ship toward the rift in the ocean of divine flames. By the evening, it was already visible, looking like a tiny black hole in the incinerating tapestry of furious light. However, the rift wasn't really that small. It just appeared so because of the distance. Sunny had almost missed it the first time, flying through the very edge of the rift and being burned by the divine flames. This time around, they were going to keep to the very middle of it, separated from the immolating orbs of white fire by many kilometers of empty space. Hopefully, that would be enough to keep them from dying of heat. The sails were hoisted, and the ship continued to plummet toward the flames. Supported only by the sorcerous power of the sacred tree and the ancient enchantments permeating the hull, Sunny was left alone at the helm, the rest of the crew seeking shelter in the main cargo hold, where the air was coolest. He had summoned the undying chain and the memory of fire augmenting the protective charm with all three of his shadows. As the flying vessel came closer and closer to the rift, the leaves of the young tree rustles above him. Ghostly runes suddenly appeared on the surface of the ancient ship. Slowly, the heat retreated a little. Standing on the upper deck was still hard and uncomfortable, but at least tolerable, especially with the help of his charm. Sunny carefully guided the vessel into the rift, keeping to the very center of it as far away from the walls of divine fire as he could. It was as though he was guiding the ship through a vertical tunnel that twisted slowly, moving left and right, forward and back. Luckily, descending didn't require a lot of skill from the helmsman. Sunny was barely acquainted with how to steer a boat, let alone a flying one the size of a frigate, so he wouldn't have been able to do much if things went wrong. But they did not. Sometime later, the ancient vessel left the rift and submerged into the darkness once again, the skies above burning like a sea of flame. He sent the ship flying toward the island that loomed in the void, not too far away, and let out a relieved sigh. They had made it. They moored the ship to one of the horizontal stone masts protruding from the island and disembarked. Walking across the obsidian pillar, everyone reached the solid ground and stopped, staring at the somber landscape in front of them in stunned silence. The ebony island was just as the last time Sunny had visited it. It was cut out of dark stone and floated in the endless emptiness, surrounded by drifting slabs of shattered obsidian. A tall and magnificent pagoda stood in its center, built of a flawlessly black, lusterless material that seemed to devour any light that touched it. Here and there on the desolate surface of the island, remains of mysterious structures stood, long turned to ruins. Several obsidian pillars protruded horizontally from its edges, stretching into the empty void like strange wharves. The flying ship floated near one of them, fastened to it by strong chains. Effie stared at the ebony tower, then turned to Sunny, her face uncharacteristically pale. Effie said, "I can't believe you made it all the way here alone. How did you even survive?" Sunny hesitated, then shrugged. Sunny replied, "Barely, and with a bit of luck." With that, he sighed and headed toward the dark tower. Near its doors, it was time for the four of them to say goodbye to the firekeepers. Cassie's cohort and the rest were not going to follow them into the nightmare. Some would maybe challenge their own in the future when they felt ready, but 1 year was really not enough to prepare most of Awakened for this harrowing trial. Instead, the firekeepers were going to remain on the Obsidian Island. Some were going to establish a temporary base there, while others would guide the flying ship back to the sanctuary of Noctis, and then return with more supplies and enough materials to continue working on the vessel itself. In that manner, they would travel between the sky below and the chained isles, awaiting the return of the challengers for as long as needed. The farewell was a bit emotional, at least on the part of the members of Cassie's cohort. She entrusted the command of it to Shim the healer and turned away, the silver half-mask obscuring her expression. No one knew if they were going to see each other again. For the survivors of the Forgotten Shore, parting with those who they cared about was nothing new. However, it never became easy. Sunny opened the gates of the Ebony Tower and guided the others into its dark halls, ascending one level after another. Effie and Kai were looking around, curiosity mixing with fear on their faces. Cassie paled terribly on the second level, where the harrowing rot had once grown from the severed arm of a deity but did not say anything. The Hall of Runes affected her even worse. Kai and Effie were guided through it by Sunny, their eyes tightly shut, but the blind girl could not do the same. Her keen intuition and enhanced senses sometimes were akin to a curse. However, for that very same reason, her mental resilience was also unmatched. She gritted her teeth and persevered. Finally, they reached the last level and drowned the stone arch of the portal with divine flame, taking turns feeding their soul essence to the cruel sight. With their combined efforts, activating it did not take as long as when Sunny had tried to do it alone. Soon, they were standing inside a graceful white gazebo, the portal disappearing behind them. In front of them, though, was the tranquil haven of the Ivory Island. Slates of shattered marble floated around it. There was a beautiful meadow near the gazebo and a peaceful grove of trees, their branches rustling under the gentle wind. Some distance away, connected to the gazebo by a stone path, stood the magnificent pagoda built out of pristine white material that was neither stone nor wood. It was beautiful, graceful, and slightly surreal, as though too sublime to exist in the mortal realm. And around it, the bones of a dead dragon lay, reflecting the radiant light of the sun. They walked past the clear lake and through the jaws of the great beast, finally entering the solemn darkness of the ancient Hall of Chains, where Hope had once been bound. Once inside, the four of them froze, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue. 7 chains lay on the pristine white floor in front of them, each ending in a broken shackle. The shackles were marred and torn, their mangled surface inscribed with a myriad of runes. A strange shimmering rose from their surface in ethereal wisps, coalescing into a chaotic, ever-changing mass of pure darkness that pulsated in the very center of the great hall. But it wasn't darkness, not really. Instead, it was a rift in the fabric of reality, one that could devour even light itself. Hypnotized by the visage of the sea, Sunny felt it deep in his soul, the magnetic, insidious call of the nightmare. This time, finally, he was going to answer it. Sunny sighed and then looked at his companions. They had already said everything that needed to be said. Discussed everything that could be discussed. There was no reason to linger. Sunny asked, "Are you ready?" Effie, Kai, and Cassie remained silent for a while, staring at the pulsating darkness. Their faces were pale and vulnerable, devoid of the usual masks of confidence. Finally, the blind girl whispered. Cassie said, "What are we waiting for? It is just the second nightmare." Sunny smiled, then suddenly laughed. Sunny agreed, "Indeed." With that, he gripped her shoulder for a moment and then stepped forward, heading toward the pulsating rift in reality. With each step, the world seemed to dim a little, turning darker and darker. Effie, Kai, and Cassie followed. A few moments later, they were gone. The Hall of Chains was gone too. Sunny found himself standing alone in complete darkness, surrounded by utter nothingness. In this nothingness, he heard the voice of the spell.
Awakened, prepare for your second trials.
He smiled darkly. Sunny muttered, "Just like the first one. Well, let's see where I land this time. I doubt that it can be any worse than before." The voice of the spell thundered again, making him shiver.
5 brave ones, welcome to the nightmares.
The darkness moved, turning into something else, something different. Sunny, however, was not paying attention. Sunny sputtered, "Wait, 5? Did it say 5? Who's the 5th one? What?" He didn't get to finish that thought, though. His vision cleared, revealing. End of Volume 3, Chained Isles. Sunny dreamt of boundless blue skies. Beneath them, a patchwork of islands floated in the air, laid on the backdrop of velvety darkness like a beautiful mosaic. Some islands were verdant and green, some were desolate and empty, and some were covered by ancient ruins, the weathered stones overgrown by moss. All of them were bound by colossal iron chains that rattled loudly as the islands rose and fell. Hovering above the abyss, a scattering of pale stars shining somewhere far, far below them. In the center of the mosaic, an ugly wound gaped, a vast tear in space where nothing but emptiness remained. A lone island soared above that tear, 7 torn chains hanging from its slopes, a beautiful white pagoda standing on its surface in a mantle of clouds. Suddenly, the sun rolled backward, soon disappearing behind the eastern horizon. The skies darkened, and then were illuminated again as a radiant moon streaked across them, swift enough to turn into a blurry trail of light. A moment later, it was day again, and then it was night once more. The skies grew torn between light and darkness, time flowing in reverse with terrible speed. Sunny watched as the islands beneath him slowly changed their shapes, as ruins rose from the ground and assembled into unwavering structures. As the stars burning in the abyss grew brighter and brighter, new ones igniting each moment, until the whole void was suffused with a furious white light. One after another, fallen islands rose from that annihilating light, the chains that had tethered them to the rest of the mosaic repairing themselves. Soon, the tear in its center was no more, and instead, a vast ashen wasteland of scorched isles appeared in its place. The ivory tower descended from high above, taking its place at the very heart of the wasteland. An instant later, the ashes were no more, revealing a breathtaking aerial city that sprawled across dozens of islands, all of them connected to each other by arching bridges and overflowing aqueducts built out of pristine white stone, with vibrant flags fluttering in the wind and sparkling waterfalls flowing into the abyss below. Slowly, Sunny's gaze was pulled west, toward the very edge of the chained isles. There, one of the great chains anchored them to the lands beyond, and a mighty fortress stood at the precipice, similar to the other border strongholds he had seen before. The island next to it resembled a vast stone bowl, with rows of seats cut into its weathered white slopes, and a circular arena laying at its bottom, painted dull red. And even further than that was an island with a strange river that flowed endlessly through it, forming a circle around an ancient statue of a beautiful woman wielding a spear in one hand and gripping a beating human heart in the other, her nakedness covered only by a beast hide tied around her thighs, her face lost in the shadows. That was the island where Sunny found himself, and of course, he was thrown straight into the damn river. Sunny snarled, "Goddamn it, why does this keep happening to me?" Sunny was so angry that he didn't even feel any panic. Unlike the previous 2 times, the spell had decided to give him a cold and wet welcome, first on the Forgotten Shore, then at the sanctuary of Noctis. This time, at least, he had an idea of where he was and in which direction to swim if he wanted to reach the surface. Sunny strained his muscles to struggle against the strong current, and finally realized that something was terribly, terribly wrong. His body refused to listen, or rather it did, but in a way that made no sense at all. His limbs didn't move as he willed them to, and instead of swimming, he simply thrashed around, submerging deeper and deeper into the cold, dark water. His senses were all messed up too, so he couldn't even understand what had gone wrong. Sunny gasped. What the hell? Now Sunny finally was starting to panic a little. This went way beyond what he had experienced in the first nightmare. Back then, the body given to him by the spell had felt almost the same as his own. This time, however, it was way too unfamiliar. Was this what Master Jet had warned him about? Sunny tried to keep calm and swim ashore, but moving through water, especially with such a strong current, was not an easy task. It required a lot of coordination and a fair bit of balance, which he simply lacked right now. No matter what he tried to do, his efforts only made things worse. He fell deeper and deeper into the river, drowning slowly. His lungs were already starting to burn from the lack of oxygen. They also felt as weird as the rest of him. His vision was already darkening. Sunny gritted his teeth, which suddenly sent a wave of pain through his mouth and jaw, and then stopped struggling, letting the current pull him down. Then he concentrated on his shadow sense, and as soon as his body struck the rocky bottom of the river, stepped through the shadows to appear near the stone statue. Sunny fell into the grass, coughing violently. He tried to suck in a breath of fresh air, only to find out that even that was a struggle. His lungs were refusing to work as they were supposed to. And even though he managed to inhale, it was still not enough to chase the sensation of suffocating away. Sunny wheezed. What is going on? Damn it. Sunny sprawled on the ground and closed his eyes, cutting off all of his senses to concentrate on trying to take control of the mess of his new body. Sunny told himself, "Don't think. Thinking will only make things worse. This thing has to have instincts. You now have them too." He cleared his mind of any thoughts about breathing and oxygen, and soon his instincts did indeed take over. It was like the story of a centipede that was asked how it walked and fell down unable to move. As soon as Sunny stopped thinking about inhaling, his body did so on its own. Suddenly, his lungs were full of sweet air and he was strong and vigorous once more. Sunny breathed. Oh, thank gods. Sunny did not move for a few moments, breathing deeply, and then tried to understand what type of a vessel, exactly, had the spell chosen for him. Before he could, however, a beautiful voice suddenly sounded above him, full of curiosity and amusement.
What a strange thing you are.
Sunny opened his eyes and struggled to rise to his feet, turning his head swiftly in the direction of the speaker. When he did, he froze. In front of him, kneeling near the statue, was perhaps the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She had soft skin and a delicate, exquisite face, her chestnut hair streaming down her shoulders like lustrous silk. Her eyes were suffused with light and shone gently, like 2 silver stars. Sunny had seen a lot of stunning beauties in his lifetime, but no one could even remotely compare to the quiet, breathtaking grace of this stranger. Just one look at her made his heart race and his face flush. She was more like a fairy than a mere mortal. And maybe she was. The beautiful woman was wearing a simple red tunic that left her shoulders bare and wielded no weapons. Despite that, her presence was vast and permeated the whole island. It was as though the blades of grass bent slightly to be closer to her. The rays of sunshine changed their path to caress her skin as though she didn't exist in the world. But instead, the world existed around her. And something about her felt strangely familiar. Sunny opened his mouth, stunned, and offered a hesitant greeting, or at least he tried to. However, what came out of his mouth instead was a hoarse, bestial growl. Sunny muttered, "What the?" He tried to speak again, and once more, his mouth produced a low, threatening snarl. The woman frowned.
One of Shadow God's creatures. How curious. I didn't know that there were any of you left here in the kingdom of hope.
Sunny stared at her dumbfounded. Then he lowered his eyes and finally looked at himself. Sunny muttered, "Oh, crap." Well, at least one of his desires had come true. Sunny wasn't short anymore. In fact, he was at least 2 meters tall. The problem, however, was that he wasn't a human. His skin was light gray, the color of stone. His legs were long and digitigrade, bending backward and ending with powerful, sharp claws. He had 4 arms, each longer and stronger than that of a human, and a long, twisting tail. His face was like that of a demon with sharp features and a mouth full of terrifying fangs. 2 curved horns were growing from his forehead, and his hair was long, black, and coarse. His eyes were fully black, with no irises and 2 vertical, furious pupils. What's worse, Sunny didn't seem to possess the vocal cords of a human. He couldn't speak. Sunny groaned, "Oh, crap." The beautiful woman looked at him and smiled. Her smile was dazzling and breathtaking, but made Sunny feel cold and scared for some reason.
Invaded my lands, little creature, but don't worry, I will gift you a death most glorious. This I promise before the gods.
She rose, standing tall in front of the ancient statue.
After all, I, Solvane, am nothing if not merciful.
Slow down there, lady.
Sunny tried to take a step back, but ended it staggering and almost falling down. Somehow, he managed to keep his balance, crouching as his talons dug into the ground. His 4 arms rose, sharp claws aimed at Solvane. All that talk of glory and death made him very, very tense.
Solvane, wait, Solvane.
A low growl escaped from Sunny's mouth as he realized who was standing in front of him. So this beautiful, graceful woman. She was the ghastly living corpse he had destroyed in the cargo hold of the crashed ship. Or rather, would be. He had traveled into the past of the Chained Isles, after all, or at least an illusory reenactment of it. It made sense that Solvane had not succumbed to her harrowing fate. Yet, Sunny shivered, remembering the silent pleading and boundless torment in the empty eyes of the Wormvin's host. How could those terrible eyes be the same as the radiant ones looking at him right now? Suddenly, he was overwhelmed by pity, compassion, and sorrow, and fear. Because if he was right and this was really the same Solvane, then this dazzling stranger who had just promised to gift him a glorious death was a saint. And a saint promising to kill him was not something Sunny had ever wanted to hear. He peered beneath the surface of Solvane's lovely figure and saw a single sphere of light burning brightly in her chest, so radiant as to appear almost blinding. Her soul core. The soul core of a transcendent. His vertical pupils narrowed, a single thought screaming in his mind, "Run." Sunny felt that his body was much more powerful than his own, inhumanly so, but without knowing how to properly control it, outrunning a saint was out of the question, if it had ever been. So, his only hope was Shadow's step. He already started to fall into the shadows when a beautiful silhouette suddenly appeared near, a graceful hand falling from above to grasp one of his arms into an iron grip. If not for bone weave, his wrist would have shattered like glass. The hold of a saint was as inevitable and inescapable as death. Sunny couldn't escape into the shadows anymore, and summoning any memory would have taken too long to be of any use. All except for one. A ghostly stiletto suddenly appeared in his trapped hand and awkwardly shot upward, leaving a thin scratch on Solvane's perfectly smooth, silky skin. She glanced at the scratch, which was slowly welling with blood, a single crimson drop falling on the verdant grass. Her luminous eyes glistened.
Then, a sacrifice of blood was made on the altar of war. Little shadow spawn, how special you are. Ah, so be it.
With that, she smiled radiantly. In the next moment, her other hand moved forward, and before Sunny could even feel fear, the world exploded with pain, and then turned utterly dark. Shadows, shadows. Sunny was surrounded by shadows. Some were close to him and some were far. Some were small and some were large. Some moved and some were still. He was one of the shadows too. No, not one, a swarm of them. A legion of shadows, all hidden in one vast and lightless soul, silent and tranquil, free of all burdens, free of all desires, free of reason and will. For now, Sonny groaned, "My head hurts." Slowly, Sonny regained his senses. The first thing he felt was pain, and then the steady beating of his hearts. Hearts. Yes, apparently he had two now, as well as 4 lungs. His body was heavy and unfamiliar, too large, too cumbersome, and too strange. Something hard and cold was pressed against it, making him feel a dull pain in his limbs. His head ached too, as though he had been struck on it hard enough to shatter a weaker skull. Well, he had been, had he not? The breathtaking beauty solving hit him. She killed him. Sonny demanded, "Damnation! Why am I still in pain if I am dead? What nonsense is this?" Full of outrage, Sonny tried to chase the pain away, but it remained. Why wouldn't it disappear? It wasn't supposed to torment him still, unless he wasn't dead. And the saint had not, in fact, killed him with one strike. Sonny hissed and opened his eyes. What he saw made him stare for a few moments and then laugh. Or rather, he wanted to laugh, but what came out of his mouth instead was a chilling, deeply disturbing, uneven wail. Sonny exclaimed, "Oh gods! This is just too on the nose, really. Come on." Sonny was so amused because the hard and cold things pressed painfully against his body were the sturdy bars of an iron cage. He was in a cage again, and there was a steel collar wrapped around his neck. Sonny was once again turned into a slave. Sonny raged, "Hey, Spell, is this funny to you? Are you happy with yourself, you wretch?" His new cage was way smaller than his previous one in the Night Temple. In fact, it was barely large enough to fit his lanky body with all its limbs, claws, and horns. The cage was hung from the ceiling by a rusty chain, and his every move caused it to sway lightly, the bars digging painfully into his flesh. Sonny growled angrily and looked around, trying to make sense of his previous sensations. What were all the other shadows he had felt close by? Sonny muttered, "Crap." All around him were rows of hanging cages of different sizes, and each of them imprisoned a creature of some sort. There were monstrous wolves, stone gargoyles, giant slithering worms, bulging mounds of flesh with gaping circular maws, and all kinds of abominations, some of which he had seen and fought before, and some that he had never even heard of. There were closed metal boxes that produced the sound of hundreds of small feet rustling against their surface, and cages large enough to fit a chain worm. In fact, there was a chain worm trapped in one not too far away from Sonny. There were even cages that contained humans. Sonny stared at this dungeon of horrors for a bit and shivered. Sonny muttered, "What the hell is this place?"